In a world of glittering palaces and fancy high society parties, a young man with piercing blue eyes stands apart from the nobles, a faint, determined smile tugging at his lips, surrounded by heavy hitters, a stern mustached man. A blonde beauty swaying like she owns the room, yet his path is going to be his alone, because this is where deadly betrayal and one power everyone misunderstands will ignite into a story only he can carry. A young woman wears anxious confusion like a mask, staring at a weird skill that always seems to summon trouble for everyone around it. Monster Attractor, a high-level ability that sounds less like power and more like a curse. And she has no idea the young man about to cross her path is about to flip her whole perspective. In the loud bustle of the town square, a bold young merchant steps up to a shaking, timid woman, thrusts his hand out like an invite, and offers to buy her monster-attracting skill for a mind-blowing 1 million, so shocking she can't even find words. After a respectful bow and a soft thank you, the bargain is sealed, and his weird little enterprise is born. A deal snaps shut as two hands clamp together to seal the bargain between buyer and seller. The young man just bought the monster tractor skill, one that most people would call a disaster waiting to happen. And this win is only the latest step in his bigger mission: uncover what skills really are. A young man bows in front of a simple village woman and offers his words like a real promise, posture steady, eyes sincere, backpack strapped tight like he's riding out a long journey, while she leans in, stunned and curious, hanging on every last word. A woman grips a coin pouch so heavy it feels unreal, her face blazing with pure disbelief and joy as the young man who just paid her stays cool and satisfied, then tells her it'd be wise to get her skills appraised at the church too, handing over the money and the best advice right along with it. With a heavy pack slung over his shoulder, the young man plows through the jam-packed street and blasts his message loud and clear. He'll buy any skill the townsfolk don't want anymore, the ones they find useless or just plain annoying, so the curious crowd surges in, faces split between yeah right skepticism and wild intrigue. In a loud, lively marketplace, a young boy skips along beside his mother, totally oblivious to the weird little trade happening nearby, because this time, the skill seller is yelling to everyone that they can come right up and show him any skill they've got, promising that nothing is too strange and nothing is too weak to be worth his attention. A traveler with a huge backpack strides into the market, points and chops the air with his hand as he tells a little crowd of villagers what he's offering, then begs them to ask anything, right there, because he'll take all deals. The moment he shows up, the locals buzz and stare, since nobody in their quiet little world has ever heard a pitch like this. A split-panel image throws a young man into the spotlight, revealing one soul wearing two faces. On one side, wide-eyed and innocent like a flashback to who he used to be, and on the other, a confident, smiling youth staring ahead with a knowing, unshakable look that screams how much he's been through. A hand cradles a ripe red apple, and the sunlight flashes across its glossy skin, while ivy climbs the wall behind it like a quiet throwback, because that simple fruit isn't just sweet, it's a relic of an earlier attempt, a reminder of when his strange power was still a total mystery. In this world, skills aren't learned at all. Gods just bless you from birth, and they magically show up in your life with a divine gift that shapes everything. You can even picture it. A holy hand placing a sparkling star of power into the hands of two chosen supplicants, like the gods are forging society itself, because these abilities aren't optional, they're the core of how reality works. In a peaceful village, it's the same for everyone, strong workers and little kids alike, because these divine gifts sit at the heart of their lives, driving every job, every bond, and every interaction like an unbreakable truth. Burly guy muscles a crushing heavy sack with zero effort, while his status screen flashes strength and sturdy like it's bragging. Right beside him, a mom and her little son stroll along, their own gifts, swiftness, and concealment, glowing on screen too, because in this world everyone's talents are laid bare for the whole crowd to see. From across the way, a proud mom jabs her finger and shows off her kid to the neighbor, bragging that he's got a booming voice and deadly sword skills, while the other women hanging near the well nod along and trade the same old parent talk, comparing what each child was gifted with. A young boy with dark spiky hair grits his jaw and hauls at a heavy wooden bucket over a well, and you can tell right away he's the odd one out. While everyone else gets more, only one lonely skill floats beside him. Trading level 1. His eyes stay downcast, his mouth tightens in a small frown, and that disappointment hits hard, like he knows this blessing is barely enough. As he passes, those gossiping women don't even bother to lower their voices. They openly snarl at him like he's the boy with the useless skill, then cackle to the heavens that their own kids were never cursed. The boy's jaw locks with rage, and he mutters under his breath, even though everyone can tell he's hearing every word and it's humiliating him to pieces. Soon, a bunch of bullies trap him in a corner, sneering that tailing and clairvoyance belong to criminals, not heroes. The biggest one jabs a finger in his face and orders him to get out of the village, yet even outnumbered, he doesn't budge, eyes blazing as he dares them. Go on. Try me. The showdown sparks into pure violence when the bully flashes a cruel grin and swings a brutal punch. Then he hammers the boy with vile taunts, sneering that he's nothing but his sister's leftover scraps as the strike lands with a sickening thud, spilling the village's contempt straight into his body. Beaten, bruised, and alone, the boy trudges up the hill above the village, the endless blank sky matching the helplessness crushing his chest. He forces himself to admit it. His fight is pointless because when someone has a strength skill, he can never win a physical brawl. He finally bursts into his cozy little house, tucked away from the rest of the village, and when he shoves the door open, he calls out to his sister that he's back, pain and stubborn resolve tangled in his chest, telling himself that whatever talent he's got, it's still better than being totally, completely useless. Inside, his sister huddles at her desk under gentle window light, while cherry blossoms drift by outside. On her status screen, wow, every skill is stacked to level 20, from appraisal to drawing, dexterity, memorization, astronomy, medicine, and more. She's a total prodigy, and the difference between her and her brother is brutal. She swivels toward him with a glowing smile, her long blonde hair spilling over her shoulder, and welcomes her beloved little brother back home. Then he clocks the art supplies on her desk, and the pain in his body vanishes for a second as he asks, "Were you drawing?" She proudly shows off her newest masterpiece, a gorgeous portrait of the two of them, both of their drawn faces smiling like crazy, and with bright, affectionate eyes she teases, "So, why aren't you talking?" He glances at the sketch, cheeks warming with a shy blush, and admits, like always, it's really good. Her bright smile crumbles the instant she spots the fresh cuts on his face. He drops his gaze, wearing a heavy, silent misery, and admits those bullies keep calling him her leftover scraps. Her grin dies instantly, and rage burns cold as she snaps at them for tormenting the brother she loves. He slumps in shame, cursing the fact that he's got just one useless skill while she's packed with 10 brilliant talents, and he keeps echoing the villagers' harsh truth, that it's a total waste for someone like her to be stuck here, so the guilt eats even deeper. A memory crashes in the day his fate got sealed. He still sees the town appraiser staring at the results, totally stumped, and the worst part, the guy had never even heard of a skill called trading, so the kid is left baffled, stuck, and panicking about what his future even is. The official appraisal document didn't leave room for doubt. His only skill was trading. When he was a kid, he'd begged the world to take his gift, trying to sell a simple apple, but it stayed utterly useless. And when he finally faced the truth, that his one talent was a locked mystery he couldn't crack, it hit him like a gut punch. He remembers trudging back to his parents' place, shoulders slumped, telling them his skill failed again, his dejection hanging in the air, while his parents just stood there, their disappointment sharp, his mother's tired sigh cutting even deeper until his despair felt suffocating. That memory still stings. His parents stared at him like a lost cause, swore his talent was worthless, had dreamed he'd be a prodigy like his sister, and when he failed, they just couldn't stomach it. He still remembers his sister stepping in, eyes shining with hope. She told their parents about the money they'd saved from her drawings, then pitched the dream, a nice house in the capital, and a chance for the whole family to finally leave the village together. But their parents' plan left him out of it completely. When they cut him off coldly, his sister snapped into action, wrapping him in a protective hug and declaring, with steel in her voice, that she was staying right there in the village, choosing her little brother over a life of luxury with them. His parents coldly shoved her into their home, sneering that her useless, talentless brother was a waste of worry, and crushed by guilt and grief, the boy fought to keep her from staying, pushing her away like he wasn't worth anything at all. She clung to him even tighter, her voice low but unshakable, staring at him like there was nothing but pure, unconditional love in the world, and then she asked a question that cut through every doubt he had. What could possibly be more valuable than living with her beloved little brother? Right now, a whole year has crawled by since their parents ditched them. He clenches his fist, bruises stinging like a fresh warning, still trapped in the same fight, because no matter how long he's waited, his trading skill hasn't kicked on even once. He remembers how his sister soothed him back when he was injured, telling him to move one step at a time, experiment with new ways, and steer clear of anything that turns into a fight. She slowly dabs a special ointment onto his cheek, a remedy she brewed herself with her top-tier pharmaceutical skill, so gentle, so precise, because her whole heart is focused on healing the injuries he took defending her honor. He locks eyes with her, envy and admiration burning side by side, then shoots off a half-joking line, "Come on, just hand me one of your skills," because he can't help wishing he could borrow her incredible blessings. An old man from their village shows up at the door, shouting the sister's name, and tells her he's counting on her appraisal skills again today, so she stands to help, and her brother grumbles, "So you're really appraising villagers again?" He can't swallow his frustration. He's ranting that they're always using her. They keep begging for her help with appraisals, taking and taking, offering nothing back, and milking her kindness just because she's skilled. Sensing his pain, she yanks him into a tight, safe hug, no words, just closeness, rests her head against his, and quietly tells him with her touch to stop wearing that heartbreaking face. She leans back and meets his eyes, her face turning gentle as she swears she'll never leave him, ever, no matter what happens. Even if their parents and the whole village spit curses at him for being useless, she grabs his heart with her words and insists his skill matters. Her words soothe every scrape in his soul, and he can't believe it. His kind-hearted sister is the only one in the whole world who will truly stand by him. Flushed with all that love, he blurts that she should stop patting his head, but inside, his heart is overflowing. She straightened her dress, readied herself to go, and told him she might be home late since the mayor's relative is visiting the village. Then she blew him a quick "take care" and slipped out the door, leaving him alone inside the house. He watches her slip away from the window, waving back as she skips off with pure joy, and the second she's gone, a real smile lights up his face. He teases her to hurry along, and that quiet little moment sticks in his heart like gold. With his sister out for the night, he decides to take charge and clean the house, eyes sweeping the living room packed with towering stacks of books and art supplies, like a loud tribute to all the passions she carries. He lets out a quiet chuckle as he starts cleaning, because no matter how insanely talented his sister is, she's absolutely horrible at this. His gaze drops to her chaos-covered desk, and there it is. The portrait she drew of them, sitting proudly like it owns the place. He snatches up the drawing, and his face instantly softens as he admires the craft and the heart poured into every line. Then he murmurs to himself that it's actually incredible, a tiny perfect moment frozen on paper. As time slips by, night crashes down on the village, and that little hill house gets swallowed by shadows. Moonlight is the only glow, while the sky burns with stars and the whole place goes death quiet. The boy jolts awake, eyes fluttering open, and freezes. He's sprawled on the couch with cleaning supplies lined up neatly beside him, and a blush hits his face as he realizes he passed out mid-work. He jerks up in bed, clocking the deep darkness outside and the heavy quiet inside, and when his sister still hasn't come back, worry hits like a punch, so he grabs a little lantern and heads out to fetch her. He bursts out the front door into the cool night air, but freezes instantly, eyes blazing wide with shock as he stares at the crazy scene unfolding in the valley below. The calm night gets ripped open by a blazing orange glow. Every house in the village is on fire. Black smoke roars up into the stars, and crackling flames snap and echo like a nightmare coming closer. From up on that hill he can see it all, every single house swallowed by fire. His home, the place he once loved, now nothing but a roaring inferno. He freezes in place, lantern shaking in his grip, his mind scrambling to understand the nightmare in front of him. His village is engulfed in flames, and his sister is trapped somewhere inside that hell. Panic finally shatters his stunned silence. He erupts, screaming his sister's name, and sprints down the hill toward the blazing village. All he can think about is finding her. As he strolled into the village, the road was choked with lifeless villagers, and raging fires blazed all around, throwing sickening, flickering shadows across their dead faces. He recoils in pure horror, stumbles over a corpse and nearly topples, then clamps a hand over his mouth, choking back a gasp as the massacre finally clicks into place. This wasn't a fire, it was a slaughter. He spots the faces of the dead, his tormenting bullies, the women who laughed at him by the well, and there they all lie motionless in spreading pools of their own blood, their power and their lives snuffed out. Tears of terror and confusion pour down his face as he grabs his head and panics, screaming in his mind, who would do something this monstrous? The dread tightens as he forces himself to search for his sister right in the middle of all this carnage. His sister's earlier words suddenly hit him like a jolt. She was at the mayor's house, and that tiny spark of hope snapped his fear in half, so he spun on his heel and sprinted straight for the biggest mansion in the village. He storms up to the mayor's house and spots bodies scattered across the neatly trimmed lawn, then throws himself at the huge wooden door, only to find it sitting there, unlocked, and his worst fear hits as his hands start to shake while he pushes it open. The moment he steps in, the place hits him like a slaughterhouse. This grand foyer is a blood-soaked abattoir, with the mayor's family and staff stacked near the entrance. He creeps in with a shaky step, eyes bulging with pure terror, and the brutal horror hits him like a truck. Nausea surges as he scans the nightmare. His eyes lock on the grand staircase, slippery with blood, crowded with corpses, and the horror climbs higher into the mansion's dark, shadow-choked recesses. He whispers that it's unbearable, his voice shaking to the core. Then from the top of the stairs, a hurt voice snaps, begging, "Stop," and demanding, "What are you thinking?" His heart slams into his throat. He knows that voice. It's the mayor. Panic sparks in his mind. If he's still alive, he might finally point him to where his sister went. He creeps up the stairs, inching forward while staring past the blood-soaked railing, and there on his knees is the mayor, begging for his life and demanding to know why all of this is happening. As his view sharpens, he spots it, someone standing over the mayor, back turned to him, long blonde hair screaming her. He blurts out his sister's name, the scream tearing through his throat with a jolt of relief and brand new terror. He stops dead on the steps, his mind going blank as panic hits. He fights the urge to stare at the carnage and locks onto his sister. If she's still alive, that's all that matters, he tells himself. No thanks to the parents who dumped him, no mercy from the villagers who cursed him, not even for the worthless skill he's been stuck with. The mayor throws out his last, desperate bargain, offering the attacker the whole village if they'll just spare his life, and he's ready to hand over everything. The boy hears his sister's voice, but it's icy, distant, and nothing like her, and she calmly says she doesn't need a village that's already been wiped out. Then in the next heartbeat, blood blasts out as she cuts the mayor down for good. He's frozen in stunned silence as the mayor's headless body collapses to the floor, and that swift, merciless execution pins him in place like he can't even blink. His sister whirls around, her pretty dress soaked in blood, yet she wears that calm, welcoming smile. Then she throws her arms wide and greets her little brother like everything's totally fine. The camera drops to her shoes, planted in a fresh pool of crimson that's spreading fast, and that cruel contrast screams the nightmare he just stumbled into. His voice stammers, trembling as he blurts, "What's happening? Why are they all dead?" He can't make sense of the sweet, loving girl he knows with the cold killer staring him down. She breezily admits she miscalculated. Turns out the mayor's relative had top-tier appraisal skills, clocked her secret ability, and started plundering, while her bright, cheerful voice only makes the whole confession feel even more horrifying. She slips in so close their breaths almost touch, face inches from his, and keeps talking, because for all this time she's been masking her real self with pure concealment and killer acting, and the boy can only choke out one word. Plundering, while his mind spins out of control. She flicks her hand, brushing off the dead bodies stacked along the stairs, then shrugs like it's nothing. She already used her appraisal to drain every last skill the villagers had, and once she's done, there's zero reason to linger here another second. She grins with a playful wink, tongue out, then lands the last soul crusher, sweet as poison as she admits she ended up slaughtering every single villager. The boy reels back in pure disbelief, his head snapping side to side as if he can't accept it. Then he pleads, voice breaking in terror, begging her to tell him what she's really saying, insisting this has to be some awful lie. She bursts into a chilling laugh, her eyes glittering with madness, then tells him not to worry, because with her psychology skill, she can tell he's convinced she's going to kill him, too. She closes the distance, drops her voice into a razor-thin whisper, and spells out his worst fear, only to twist the knife. She won't end him, but she'll take everything, except the one skill she can't steal from him. He blurts out that he doesn't get it, demanding to know why his useless talent is suddenly immune. Then before his brain can catch up, she explodes with a brutal kick and sends him crashing down the long, blood-soaked staircase. He slammed into a heap at the bottom, then shot his gaze up. There she was, grinning down at him and praising his very good question. She lifted a book and declared that his big sister was about to teach him some real, valuable truths about the nature of skills. She kicks off the lesson by saying loud voices and basic detection are everywhere, like spare change, but her own pilfering ability, that's a rare skill, one you don't see often. Then she jabs a finger straight at him, her smile stretching wider and wider, saying his trading skill isn't just special, it's the only one of its kind. Only a single person in all of existence can have it at a time, so it's rarer than anything she's ever had. She gives him a smug little look and basically says, "You still have zero clue how to use your power, or even what it does." He just stares back, sputtering out it's called only skill, and the reality hits him like a truck. She leans close and hisses her chilling plan into his ear. She's going to roam the world to crank up her plundering, and when they meet again, her skill will be deadly enough to rob him blind. She jabs a finger at him like a loaded gun, eyes blazing with ruthless ambition, and shouts that she'll steal his skill, then wipe him out. Until the day arrives, she orders him to grind his rare talent into something sharper. He scrambles up, begging his sister to stop, swearing, heart pounding, that none of this can be real, but she's already vanished, tearing through the night with leaps, lightning speed, and a blast of wind magic. With a brutal gust, she vanishes off the hilltop like a ghost, and all that's left is a handful of swirling leaves, while he's stranded, completely alone, staring at the dead and dying embers of the life he used to have. He drops to his knees, trembling with grief and shock, and his mind won't stop racing. What was that escape skill she used, and how in the world could she know so much about his own hidden power? Denial crashes over him, and he bolts from the massacre, sprinting back toward the one place that still feels safe, home. He keeps chanting that it was all a lie, that the person he saw wasn't his sister, and that his real, kind sister is going to be waiting for him right there. He bursts into their empty house, his last hope crumbling the moment he sees that quiet, lonely room. Then his eyes lock onto the portrait she drew of them, perfect, smiling, and suddenly it feels like a cruel punchline. One shattered word rips out of his mouth. Why? Her final words keep screaming in his head, an awful vow to kill him, looping over and over, until he crumples to his knees, tears blasting down his face as he sobs, completely shattered, and utterly lost on how she could say something that cruel. He locks onto the drawing like it's a curse, and suddenly the love it promises feels like a lie he invented, so he screams her name, choking on raw heartbreak, then turns to the sister he thought he truly understood and demands answers. Years have crawled by, but that moment still burns in his mind. Now he's young again, clutching a silver locket in both hands, snapping it open to show the same portrait of him and his sister, like the past itself is staring back and daring him to fulfill his purpose. He slumped in a horse-drawn wagon, riding through a sea of strangers, when one of the passengers caught him staring at the locket and tossed him an easy question. Was the girl in the picture his girlfriend? A sorrowful, knowing smile flickers across the young man's lips as he slams the locket shut, then shoots a quick correction at the passenger. Yeah, it's his sister, before he shuts down any questions about their devastating history. He swivels toward the window, eyes distant, and tells the stranger, like he can't help talking it out, that even after all this time, he still can't wrap his head around what happened that night. He blurts out a quick apology for talking to himself, but his thoughts keep sprinting. Why would his sister, the kind, gifted miracle of a person, crave murder? He wants to believe she had a reason, one she never once told him. He tilted his head to the sky, and determination snapped into his eyes. He swore he'd find her again. He had to know what was going through her mind, even if it meant getting killed by her, because the truth was a risk he had to take. He clamps the locket in his fist, and fresh determination surges through him. If polishing his trading skills is the only ticket to seeing her again, then that's exactly what he'll grind for, because now it's time to move. His quest drives him straight into a massive, awe-inspiring building in this brand new city, worn backpack digging into his shoulder as he climbs the stone steps with steady confidence, because this is the place he's been hunting for. He stands in front of the brutal wooden door, takes a breath to steady his nerves, then lifts his hand and knocks hard, clear, confident, announcing himself like he means it. With a charming, practiced grin, he steps up the moment the door swings open and announces he's their skill collector, here to buy every useless, annoying ability they don't even want, while his own trading skill stays stuck at level 1. A warm voice inside tells him they've been waiting for him. This is where his new story kicks off. A boy and his sister, their lives shattered and rebuilt by their powers, and the endless people he'll meet who are tormented by the very gifts they never asked for. With a blazing, satisfied grin, he plunged into the town square, snagging skills from all kinds of citizens amid the chaos below. This was his hustle, his reason for coming to this new city. Everyone just called him the Collector, a lifesaver service for anyone who wanted to dump unwanted abilities and finally breathe. He let out a satisfied sigh, as if the stuff he snagged all day suddenly got heavier in his hands, because today's haul was a solid 12 skills, and each one was a fresh tool, a stolen sliver of someone's life, ready to be handed off to the next person. Sitting by the window of his quiet room, he watched kids play in the streets below, a soft smile tugging at his face as if he'd finally found his place, and he realized, yeah, this calm new city had become home, and he'd gotten used to this job. His thoughts snapped back to when his big sister first trained him in his craft, right there with all the kids. She kept smiling, because it was her one-of-a-kind collector service that showed him how to survive, buying and selling the raw essence of people's talents. A shadow of worry flickered over his face as he snapped back to the present, and the mystery of where his sisters were still clawed at his heart, until a woman with long blonde hair, the collector service agent he'd been dealing with, slid in and asked if he was the one behind all this. Before he could even open his mouth, an elderly woman with the weight of 1,000 lifetimes stepped forward and stared him down, sharp, fearless, and impossibly wise, demanding a private audience with him, her voice so commanding he froze on the spot, stunned and totally thrown off. They yanked him off the familiar streets and hauled him straight to a towering mansion, all old money grandeur and ruthless power, so massive it made him feel tiny, like he'd been ripped out of his humble life and dropped into someone else's world. Now he's settled in this insanely opulent parlor, sinking into luxury like it's suffocating him, and unease won't let go, because there's no way he can stay calm in a room that screams extravagance. Clutching a delicate teacup like it didn't belong in his hands, he bowed to the elder sage with respectful awe, saying he was honored to be summoned. But his confusion burst out as he asked, bluntly, if she was really sure she wanted to sell him almost all of her skills. The elder sage was all grit and ghostly power, with a shimmering aura of insane abilities, perfect recall that never missed a beat, speed reading that tore through pages, ruthless calculation, and pure mind-bending erudition, all at level 20. Then she said it straight. She wanted him to buy every single one of her gifts, except for the memory skill. The young man froze, because his own top-tier appraisal skill was screaming that what she had was priceless, so he stammered out that he could see her abilities, but the truth was way messier than what his eyes could explain. He admitted he could afford them in theory, but the truth hit hard. He didn't have the insane fortune it would take to pull off that kind of deal, and the moment he pictured a giant sack spilling gold coins, it felt like a punchline to the wealth he just didn't have. The sage dropped an offer that made 0 cents, demanding just 100,000 for the whole collection, a price so ridiculously low it felt unreal, and the boy froze, staring blankly as he begged her to explain why she'd hand him such an insane deal. Huddled in her personal library, ringed by towering shelves, the sage said, loud and certain, that her whole life had been built to chase knowledge, until her old age finally forced her to wonder if it was all she was ever meant to be. As the years piled up, doubts started gnawing at her. Was knowledge really enough to live a fulfilling life? So she tore up her old identity for good and dove into a brand new path as an adventurer, shocking everyone who knew her as nothing but a scholar. The sage flipped the whole situation on its head, blurted out that she'd heard he didn't just buy skills, he sold them too, and it left the young collector stunned. Then she nailed the truth. If he was selling skills, he had empty slots open, and that was the entire backbone of her plan. She broke down how their world really worked. The skills you could ever learn depended on the 2 to 5 slots you were born with, and that meant chasing money alone wouldn't buy an aspiring adventurer everything they needed. With her goal laid out like a target, she demanded the exact skills she wanted to buy from him, then set her sights on a kill and hide kit, top-tier swordsmanship, raw strength, brute power, recovery, concealment, and the kind of tailing that never gets noticed. Once the terms were locked in, a soft swirl of magic snapped around their handshake and sealed the huge deal for good. Then the collector's appraisal skill verified it. The trade was real, swapping a mountain of scholarly knowledge for the raw, untapped power of an adventurer. Right when their business wrapped up, a fiery red-haired kid burst into the room like a spark, showing off his own brave little skills, and with a bright grin he asked, "So, Grandpa, are you done with your talk yet?" His unstoppable energy flooded the whole grand hall. The kid, the sage's grandson, burst out with pure excitement that tomorrow would be his very first adventure, and the collector watched in silence as everything in his puzzle finally snapped into place. The grandson spilled that his dream of becoming an adventurer was ignited by the bedtime stories his grandfather read to him every single night, and the old sage just stared, pride and regret tangled in his face, as he grumbled that his grandson was a worrywart, and that he now regretted planting those tales in his head. The sage's face hardened as he snapped an ultimatum at the boy: choose that brutal path against his wishes, and he'll cast him out of their home forever. It was a ruthless, desperate move meant to keep the boy alive out there. He just kept smiling through the chaos, even apologizing to the collector for the family drama, then turned to his grandfather. He thanked him with all his heart, said his loving goodbye, and told the collector the truth. Under that tough exterior was a genuinely kind man. As soon as the grandson was gone, the sage pivoted to the collector and snapped into a hard, serious mood, then grilled him for his true professional take on the boy's skills, eyes locked on him with that deep, worried grandfather concern. The collector dropped his guard and admitted, half in shame, that he'd been sizing up the boy out of pure professional reflex, like he couldn't switch it off even if he tried. Then he straight up delivered his real verdict. The grandson's skills were insanely good, exactly the kind built for the adventure life he'd been craving with all his heart. In the tired old sage's weary eyes, real fear burned through as he finally confessed his worst dread. He prayed his grandson wouldn't lean on his natural gifts so hard that he'd slip, ignore the danger, and make one careless fatal mistake. The grand mansion loomed in eerie silence as the collector slipped out, his head buzzing with the crushing weight of everything he'd just dealt. He strode through the city streets, replaying everything that just went down, his mind a knot of confusion and cold suspicion, because even with all those powerful skills, a nasty dread kept crawling at the back of his thoughts. He couldn't shrug off how weird the sage's request was. Why would a guy starting his new life as an adventurer suddenly need top-tier hiding tricks and expert tailing? The elder looked thrilled for his grandson, but the way he was packing everything felt sneakier than it should have. A grim thought slid into his head as he imagined shadowy figures lurking in some alley, faces swallowed by darkness. There was no way a respected elder sage would ever turn to crime, yet the skills he was asking for fit that kind of life a little too perfectly. He couldn't shake the thought that those kinds of skills fit a thief way more than a noble adventurer, especially when he already had talent handed to him from birth. And then a shocking realization started creeping in, piece by piece. A fractured memory burst to the surface, some old talk from his past about people born with skills, a warning he couldn't fully decode, and even though he couldn't be sure of anything, his gut screamed that something was seriously, terribly wrong. He trudged alone through the streets as night swallowed the light, the lonely road matching the fight in his chest to decode the sage's real motives, while the city stayed dead silent, giving him zero answers for the questions tearing through his mind. Staring up at the gray, stormy clouds, he slammed the decision into place. Tomorrow he was gone, and the plan in his head was crystal clear. The next day, deep in a sun-dappled forest, the sage's grandson practically fizzed with nerves and excitement, because this was his very first expedition, the kind of dream he'd only dared to imagine. His eyes blazed the moment he spotted it, right up ahead, a nest packed with monster eggs, the exact prize they'd been chasing. He practically burst with excitement, pointing it out to his crew, and for the first time, adventure felt like it was right there within their grasp. Without warning, a savage, bird-like beast exploded out of the foliage and screeched through the trees as it lunged for the boy, and a party member blurted a frantic warning, while another teammate lunged in front of it to block the deadly strike at the last second. After a razor-sharp fight, the whole party finally exhaled. Danger was gone for real, and the grandson lit up with a huge grin as he thanked his companion for saving him, celebrating their very first successful job. But when the adrenaline finally died down, the grandson froze, prickles crawling up the back of his neck, and for a split second he swore someone was lurking in the shadows, watching them. Then he shook it off as pure imagination. Tucked deep in the thick leaves of a nearby bush, the young skill collector finally let out a quiet breath of relief, his chest still knotted with tension, because he'd been watching the whole time, a silent guardian no one saw. He shoved the branch out of the way and burst from his hiding place, his boots crunching quietly on the forest floor. His eyes snapped to the other hidden figure in the woods, the elder sage who'd been watching too, and the collector stayed cool, asking the old man how his grandchild did, while his own status flashed that he'd reached level 7, mastered concealment, and was now tailing them. The sage froze in pure disbelief, face gone pale, sweat dripping down his wrinkled temple, as if he'd just witnessed the impossible, because he was absolutely sure his presence couldn't be detected. A sly little smile tugged at the collector's lips as he explained why he was there, saying he'd be devastated if the skills he sold ever got abused, leaving the bewildered sage stuck on one burning question. Why show up and why follow them? The collector finally cracked and spilled his secret. He'd only burned through 7 of the skill levels he bought, keeping 23 locked and loaded for later, and then he dropped the real bomb. He could partially transfer skill levels, something the sage never believed was possible, which is exactly how he sniffed out the old man's presence so effortlessly. That crazy power came from a rare skill, one that lit up like a beacon on his status panel. This ability was the heart of his whole operation, a brutal, game-changing power that left every other fighter in the dust. He broke down why it was so insane, because during a trade, he could tweak the skill levels, stash abilities beyond his tiny slot limits, and haul way more powers than any person ever should. At last, the sage grasped just how dangerous the collector's power really was, then demanded, "Are you going to keep stalking your grandson in the shadows?" The collector nodded. He'd do it as long as his body still had the strength to last. The old man scoffed at how overprotective this was, but the collector's eyes didn't budge, steadfast and unshakable. He swore he'd guard the boy every single day, then turned to the sage and demanded to know why he was going to such extreme lengths himself. A crushing sadness swept across the sage's face, his eyes brimming with years of regret, as he admitted this was his penance, his way of paying for every past failure to his family. His story kicked off decades ago, when his hunger for knowledge and the power of his own skills swallowed every breath, leaving nothing, not even a shred, for the people he loved. Back when he was younger, he was a prodigy. His mind was a fortress packed with top-tier intellect, but it still wasn't enough, so he chased knowledge like a storm, convinced deep down that he deserved to have it all. Rage of obsession took over his life, and at night he slipped out of home to hunt for more books, more secrets to devour. He'd head back home to a family that felt like strangers. No warm greetings or loving gestures could crack the fortress of his academic ambition. For years, his family felt like just a formality, nothing more than background noise to the thing he truly loved, and he was so checked out that the news his own daughters were about to get married barely even landed. He choked on deep shame and admitted it. He didn't give a damn about his wife or his daughter's new family, because all he lived for was burning through every book he could find across every neighboring country. His whole life turned into a non-stop blur of flipping pages from one library to the next, and that gift of skills morphed into a cruel, self-made prison of isolation. Only when he devoured almost every last page did he finally stop, hit by this brutal, hollow dread, staring at all that knowledge like, so, what was it all for? And there on his desk, the unopened letters from his family sat untouched, accusing him with every second. That crushing realization slammed into him. Knowledge wasn't something to hoard for yourself. It was meant to be shared, fought for, and used to protect someone you truly treasure. Panic ripped through him, and he bolted back home like he couldn't breathe without it, only to find no warm reunion waiting, just his sick daughter lying there, hanging on. She stared at him with eyes full of exhaustion and hate, her voice cracking as she demanded, "Why did you come back now, after all this time?" First, she laid out the nightmare that hit them while he was gone. An epidemic tore through her family, stealing her mother and her husband, leaving her clinging to just her newborn. And with a bitter snap in her voice, she basically told him he probably didn't care. Overwhelmed by the damage his neglect caused, the sage crumpled onto his knees, begging for forgiveness he knew he couldn't truly earn, while his daughter just stood there, watching in silence, her face impossible to read. Tears of crushing guilt streamed down his face as the full weight of his failure finally hit him, and then his daughter landed the final blow, shaking him with the truth that her time was slipping away too. In her last heartbeat, she handed him one final shot at redemption, tell him that if he really wanted to atone, he'd spend the rest of his life raising her son, his own grandchild. All he could do was break down and sob, calling himself the fool of a father. That crushing memory finally ended with him gripping his tiny grandson's hand, swearing he'd protect him no matter what, and when he told the collector the truth, he broke down. His daughter died soon after, and that regret would haunt him forever. From that day on, he threw his whole soul into raising the boy, pouring into him the love and attention he'd selfishly withheld from his own daughter. He looked the collector dead in the eye and said he'd gladly sell off every skill he'd ever learned, because now there was only one he cared about, the power to hold on to the memories of his family and nothing else. Clutching his chest, he vowed that one thing, the skill memory, was all he needed to keep hold of the faces he loved and every precious second with them. In a split second, the collector's thoughts snapped to his own sister and the kids she used to protect, and it hit him hard. Some memories, some people, you can't just erase without breaking. A wild idea ignited in his head, and he marched up to the sage, spilling that he had a spare skill he'd been hoarding for just this moment. Then he pressed for an empty slot, because he was convinced it could be the key to everything that was trapping him. Leaning in, the sage stared as the collector bragged about a rare, high-priced skill, one that would let him guard his grandchild for the rest of his life. The collector threw out a brutal warning. This skill was so high-level and deadly powerful that to buy it, the sage would have to hand over his entire fortune. But the collector already had the answer locked in before the old man even opened his mouth, and that tiny smile said he'd seen it coming. The sage stared him down with steel in his eyes, no doubt left, his decision already sealed. And just like that, a second, even deeper deal snapped into place, two men locking eyes under the forest canopy, no words needed, just a silent agreement. Back in the city, the grandson's adventuring crew buzzed with excitement, talking nonstop about the newcomer begging to join their ranks, while the skill collector nearby just lounged with a newspaper, acting totally unbothered. The grandson suddenly blurted out, pointing down the street, cheer bursting from his voice as he announced the newcomer had just arrived. Silver-haired and instantly recognizable, the young man slid up to the group, bowed with a polite apology for being late, and introduced himself as Lou, then swore he'd be zero trouble. The grandson greeted him with a big grin, laughing that this young man voice sounded shockingly just like his old grandpa. The collector snapped his gaze up from the paper, smirking as he read about a rare elven skill called Youthful Mask ***, and he couldn't help thinking the elder sage had nailed his way into the party. At level 50, the paper swore the skill could make you look 50 years younger, pure illusion, not real youth, but the elder sage didn't get his body back. He only regained the look just so he could stay beside his grandson. He watched the sage, now wearing his youthful mask as Lou, laugh right beside his grandson, and that real, warm connection filled the air, while the collector grinned, knowing the old man had finally landed on the exact skill he needed. A real smile cracked across the collector's face, pure joy. He was genuinely thrilled as that shattered family found a fresh way to stay together, even if it was wildly unconventional. As he pushed through the packed city streets later, he mentally promised himself he'd restock that youthful mask skill. Just like that, a tiny uproar yanked him out of his thoughts. This frail girl stumbled, crashed onto the cobblestones, and her flower basket burst open all over the ground. He shot to her side instantly, blurting out, "Are you okay?" He stared down at her face, getting lost in her big, sorrowful eyes, and noticing the dirt smeared across her cheek. She coughed out weakly into her hand, winced with a small apology, and thanked him for checking on her as he hauled her back to her feet. Her eyes landed on the battered, scattered flowers, and her shoulders caved in with pure despair as she muttered that she had to sell them anyway, until the collector's calm voice soothed her, gently telling her she didn't need to worry. She stared up at him, baffled by how calm he stayed, while she swore the flowers were ruined. Then he dropped to a knee and told her they were still good enough to sell. With a warm, calming smile that chased the sadness from her eyes, he leaned in and dropped a shockingly sweet offer. He promised he'd buy every single one of her flowers. Her eyes flew open with pure disbelief, a shy blush creeping over her cheeks as she realized she was holding a bouquet of every one of her flowers, saved from total ruin by a stranger's sudden, generous kindness. This young girl selling flowers along the cobblestone street just couldn't process what she was hearing. This kind-faced boy, all traveler with his packed gear, was actually offering to buy every single blossom she had. With a gentle, reassuring smile, he confirmed his intentions, and the girl's face erupted in pure shock and unstoppable joy, like her heart finally found its answer. She blurted out a trembling thank you, then immediately got to work wrapping up the bouquets for her surprise benefactor. Clutching those flowers to her chest, she suddenly got hit with an unseen status that screamed the truth. Her life was miserable. A curse saddled her with 3 brutal curses at once. Bad luck, sickness, and a weak constitution, and that's why she looked so frail and why desperation burned in her eyes. The traveler everyone called the collector watched her in silence, because his weird gift let him spot the hidden traits others couldn't even see. He'd crossed paths with a ton of skills before, but nothing prepared him for how brutally rare it was to find someone cursed with that level of pure, unfortunate bad luck. His thoughts snapped back to his own rules of the trade, how even the most miserable, ugly skills could still serve a purpose in the right hands. So he made it his mission to collect that kind of power, and this girl's suffering handed him a grim, perfect opening. Tears shimmered in her eyes as she poured out the truth. Just one act of kindness could finally put food on the table for her younger brother and sister for the day, and when the collector leaned in, he spotted the dark circles under her eyes and softly asked if she'd even gotten a wink of sleep. A sharp wave of empathy slammed into his chest, because it dragged him straight back to his own painful days, when his sister stayed up late, drawing pictures just to stretch money to the next paycheck, and seeing what she had to work with, he knew he couldn't possibly swallow the huge profit he'd just pulled in from their earlier deal. He lunged a step closer and thrust a huge stack of bills toward the stunned girl, telling her he'd just struck it rich and couldn't help but share his luck with her. Then her eyes popped wide at the sight of money she'd probably never even dreamed she'd hold. He shoved the cash into her palm, and just like that, a gentle glow swallowed them for a heartbeat, proving this wasn't some ordinary purchase. The deal was sealed, and the young flower girl was left completely stunned, speechless, and utterly lost at how fast everything changed. He told her to treat the money like a lucky charm, a little push for her future business, and before she could even thank him again, he was already pivoting away and striding off down the loud, crowded city street. As she watched him disappear, the truth hit her like a punch, one she couldn't see, but she could asterisk feel it. The collector had just sold her a brand new skill, good luck level 1 asterisk asterisk. The deal was clean, asterisk asterisk mutual consent asterisk, and money asterisk asterisk, and every condition had been met. He stared at his own hand, feeling the fresh power settle in his bones, because he'd truly taken her sickness, crushed her weak constitution, and swallowed the curses that had been tormenting her from the start. 3 brand new skills for that cheap price. He figured it was worth every bit. He'd handed her the good luck skill just to balance the trade, and he honestly prayed her new life would feel like it finally clicked for her. He clutched the fresh bouquet he'd just bought, the bright colors screaming against the cold, grim world he worked in. As he strode out of the market square, he racked his brain over what to gift his friend on his upcoming visit. Then it hit him. Flowers. Sure, they looked a bit battered from the street, but their sweet scent still hit hard. His quest pushed him into a calmer corner of town, where stalls lined the way and all kinds of goods dangled from wooden racks. He kept roaming the market, hunting for practical stuff to make the gift feel useful, and as the cold really started to bite, he smartly grabbed some medicine too, just in case trouble hit. His arms soon sagged under a mountain of bags, and he let out a chuckle like, I may have gone a little too hard on shopping. Right then, a familiar voice cut through the noise. An older woman from a nearby stall spotted him instantly and called him the collector. Her face lit up with pure gratitude as she thanked him for the deal they struck the other day, reminding him that he'd bought her monster traction skill, something she looked relieved to finally be free of. She lit up and told me how her life had flipped the moment we made that deal, because the nonstop monster attacks finally stopped, and real peace let her venture outside town to stock up on ingredients, pushing her one step closer to her lifelong dream. Opening her own diner. With a bright, proud smile, she jabbed her finger at a gorgeous 2-story building down the street. then she announced it like a promise. Her brand new inn and diner would open soon on the first floor of that exact place. Tears nearly choked her as she kept thanking the collector again and again, crediting him for everything, while he only watched with a satisfied smile, until she admitted her next hurdle would be tracking down staff for the brand new place. With a spark of inspiration, she shoved a recruitment flyer into his hands and teased that a waiter's apron would make him look downright dashing. But he shot the idea down fast, saying his hands were already maxed out running his unique collector service. The innkeeper let out a weary sigh and told him it was a shame, then urged him to hand that flyer to anyone hunting for work. So the collector took the paper, but it still rattled in his head because he had no clue what he'd even do with it. As he kept moving, he caught sight of that young flower girl again across the square, and a wild idea started brewing in his head. At first, he shrugged it off, convinced his quiet friend wasn't made for a job that meant dealing with people. Then he noticed she wasn't alone. Her two little siblings were right there, grinning and clutching their share of the flowers, faces glowing with joy, and he watched her keep her cool as she calmly told them the errand was her responsibility, like that tiny moment of quiet maturity. His eyes softened as he watched her gently pat her younger brother's head, and in that tiny moment, he felt the weight of her earlier desperate words sink in. This money wasn't for luck, it was survival, and he was finally seeing her responsibility with his own eyes. Another customer stepped up to the girl and asked to buy a bouquet, and she snapped into a bright, professional smile right away, especially once she spotted the collector nearby. Then she turned back to her siblings and warned them to handle the flowers with care. The collector blinked in surprise and asked her straight up if she really remembered him that clearly, and she lit up with a radiant smile. Yes, absolutely, and then told him she was over the moon that he'd loved her flowers. He watched her breeze through the sale like she'd done it 1,000 times, turning the flyer over in his hand as his thoughts churned. And the more he saw, the more he realized she was calm, conscientious, and naturally gifted with customers, the exact kind of person a diner would need. He finally snapped into action, stepped forward and shouted for her attention, then paused for half a heartbeat, praying he made the right move. He thrust the flyer into her hands and told her a part-time job had just opened up, and the moment she grabbed the paper, her eyes popped wide with shock as she read what was printed there. Her shock snapped into full-blown excitement, and she blurted that she'd absolutely love the job because she'd been desperately hunting for work just moments ago. With wide-eyed wonder, she told him her awful asthma had vanished out of nowhere, like a miracle. She swore it was because of the bad luck he'd sold her, only she'd misremembered their deal a little, but the outcome hit like a truck. The good luck skill was now lighting up in her status. She admitted she couldn't explain how it worked, but one thing was clear. She'd stopped tripping, stumbling, and crashing into everything like before, and the collector just sat there, soaking in how his skill trading could genuinely flip someone's life. Realizing he'd finished the job here, he declared it was time to bolt before sunset, because there was still a friend waiting for him. Shocked by his sudden disappearance, the girl blurted his name right away. She had to know the guy who'd bought her flowers and somehow landed her a job all in the same crazy day. He flashed a tiny, mysterious smile and introduced himself. No personal name, just his title, and everyone knew him as the traveling peddler called the collector ***. She watched his silhouette fade down the street, still clutching that precious job flyer while her basket of flowers hung heavy in her arms, and the young girl couldn't stop wondering, would their paths ever collide with that mysterious collector again? The story snaps away from the cozy city and slams into brutal, biting cold as it heads for a remote mountain range, where towering peaks are buried under thick, spotless snow, proving they've already dragged themselves through the kind of journey you don't take lightly. Up close, the place looks like a dead forest. Bare branches sag under icy snow beneath a washed-out winter sky, and the air bites so hard it feels like you're standing alone at the edge of the world. At last, the collector trudges into his destination, a lonely little log cabin buried deep in hostile wilderness, muttering that the trail is brutal even with his specialized skill products. Then he shouts a familiar greeting to whoever's inside. From the side of the cabin, a figure comes into view mid-swing, slamming a massive axe down with bone-crushing force. Crack, and the log splits in an instant, showing off raw, unstoppable power. The camera drops to their bare feet, pounding the freezing snow, calloused, tough, and ready for anything, proving just how they survived this brutal world. The figure whips around, and boom, there's the man with long, wild black hair and a rough, battle-worn body, greeting the collector right back. The second he spots the bouquet, he can't help but rag on his friend, cracking that maybe those flowers were meant for some mystery woman. The man flashes a playful grab on the collector's arm and warns him, "Don't drag yourself into criminal trouble over a woman." But the collector just shrugs and says, dead straight, that the gift's recipient isn't a woman, it's a girl. His playful grin slips away, and serious hope takes over his face. he asks the collector for the usual one more time, insisting that this round just might be the one that finally works. A soft smile curls on the collector's lips as he admits this was the whole point of his brutal journey. This gift was just a bonus on top, nothing more. And deep down, he realizes the rugged brute standing there is one of the very few people he'd ever call a true friend. Two of them stand in the silent, snowy clearing outside the lonely cabin, and the collector's thoughts spill out. This man has been a regular for years and a true friend. Brutal close-up locks onto the rugged man's blazing, hard-earned determination, and the narration slams shut on a mind-blowing revelation. Because even with all that raw physical power, the world has still tossed him a cruel, dismissive label. Unskilled. The collector finally admitted it. His favorite old regular really had come to this far-off, snow-choked cabin, and sure enough the rugged, time-worn man sat on a plain stump, eyes locked on him. With that same grim confidence, he asked if he could get the usual service again, just like always, that heavy little ritual they shared. With a heavy heart, the collector nodded and agreed, staring into his friend's eyes where desperate hope just wouldn't die. Then the scarred man in battered furs told him to step forward and use his skill, grinding weariness settling into his chest as he braced himself for that inevitable, gut-wrenching task. The old man shut his eyes tight, every muscle humming with anticipation as he barked the order for the collector to fire up his appraisal skill. Then he froze in place, waiting for the verdict he'd chased for decades, praying it would finally change everything. Even the air seemed to hold its breath, and the only sound was the quiet crunch of snow beneath his feet. The collector's face gave it away before anyone even spoke a word. Quiet sorrow wiped across him like a storm he couldn't hide. The man's shoulders sagged instantly as realization hit, and he blurted out an apology for dragging his friend through all that pain. With a sad smile, he just read the room, because the collector's expression said the same thing every single time. Trying to break the heavy silence, the man pointed toward the cabin and told the collector he'd just picked up art, carving tiny figures lately. Then he pressed a gift into his hands. A little wooden bear, brutally carved, and a harsh little token of their long, twisted friendship. When the collector snatched the tiny figurine, the man's words slammed into him. Everything he'd confessed years ago, the real reason his life became a never-ending fight. He was one of the unskilled, born with a 1 in 1,000 defect that shut down every chance of ever awakening a skill, and that brutal curse fueled his relentless, maybe even hopeless, chase. The man stared at him like he'd finally figured it out, like he knew the collector couldn't sell him a single skill, no matter how hard or how kindly he tried, because the ugly truth was clear. He'd never be able to awaken abilities on his own. The collector's silence hit like a death sentence. Turns out the man had 0 skill slots, no matter how brutal his decades of training were or how hard he refused to doubt himself. Every swing of his sword, every monster he cut down, still couldn't patch the unbeatable gap he was born with. Yet even with that gut punch hanging over him, his eyes still burned like a wildfire that wouldn't die. He swore, with full conviction, he wasn't quitting. He'd keep fighting to wake up his own power no matter what odds crushed him, because his spirit was forged from pure adversity and nothing could break it. The collector clocked it instantly. His passion hadn't dulled one bit, not even after all these years, and those same burning, unbreakable eyes stared back like they did the day they first met. It wasn't just determination, it was raw defiance, screaming at the fate he'd been handed at birth. That first meeting crashed back into the collector's mind like a lightning strike, flashes of a crowded town street, where a young boy with steel in his eyes shouted, begging him to buy any useless skills he had, and the collector watched as desperation drove the kid to chase him down, step after frantic step. The collector whipped around, shocked to hear a kid talking to him like that, and the boy begged, hard, asking if he was really just going to toss away skills he didn't want and handing them over to him instead. The collector couldn't wrap his head around it, stunned that a child would be so desperate to steal skills for himself. With his appraisal in hand, the collector stared at the boy, and the results hit like a punch. There were no skill slots at all. He tried to hide the panic, because this was the first time he'd ever seen someone so fundamentally unable to hold an ability. His memory snapped into place, showing the boy getting crushed again and again by his classmates. They jeered at him, barked that he was useless, and even ordered him to stay out of town. And when he dared to act confident, they mocked him for it, because somehow he'd been born with 0 talent at all. But the boy refused to swallow their verdict. He snapped back, screaming that it wasn't impossible. Fury flared as he denied being inept, insisting he just hadn't awakened his skills yet. Then he made a vow. He'd claw those powers through hard work, and he'd prove everyone wrong by disappearing into the mountains to train. He wheeled on the collector, a silent witness to his humiliation, and swore he'd earn a skill. Just watch me. then spun around and bolted toward the lonely mountains, driven by nothing but stubborn belief, while the collector couldn't help feeling a crushing wave of pity as that little kid vanished into the wild. And that's how the lonely boy's trial started. He threw his entire life at one goal that sounded impossible, swinging a plain wooden stick 100 times a day, then doubling down until his body screamed for mercy, all because he was clinging to one desperate thought. If he just pushed hard enough, he could make the skill appear. Right now, the collector clutched a lantern, its flicker carving shadows into his worried face, and he couldn't stop thinking, could sheer hard work really erase something this deep, this broken at the core? While the facts of the world stayed ruthless, the boy's hope burned steady and unshakable. The collector stared at his own purpose and realized his trading had turned him into a living junkyard of discarded skills: management, appraisal, psychology, even speech, all clawed together for one mission: to finally meet his older sister. Now he wasn't just a person anymore. He was a vessel stuffed with countless abilities and buried potential, waiting to wake up. Over the years, he'd mastered countless skills, and even carried the wild gift of eternal youth in his own body. Yet as he stared into the starry night, it finally hit him. After all this time, all this obsession, had he forgotten the very spirit that fueled a boy like him? Now he finally got it. Whatever spirit he'd been losing for years wasn't gone. It was calling to be reclaimed. Steel hardened in his chest, a brand new decision sparked to life. He had to act. He also knew stepping in was part of the job, a risk that could tangle him in a cause that looked hopeless. But he couldn't stay away. He had to see the boy again, at least once. He refused to stand on the sidelines while something this powerful unfolded right in front of him, because he felt it in his bones. A deep, burning bond to the boy's fight, and a desperate pull to be part of it, even if he only ended up watching. With a snap of sheer resolve, the collector started gutting his own power, scrubbing every slot clean until only the bare essentials for survival and the mission remained, tossing aside presence detection, psychology, and even speech like they were dead weight. He swore by nothing but his management act and that eternal youth that kept him alive, then pushed straight into the freezing wilderness. And when he finally tracked down the boy in the mountains, he called out that he was the collector from the other day, then hurried to apologize for coming after him, saying he'd been scared something terrible might have happened. The boy snapped into defense the second he saw him, shouting for him to get lost if he was only there to mock his training, while the collector, now lacking any speech skill, watched his words trip out clumsily, unable to explain himself the way he wanted. Frustration surged through the boy as he called out the brutal irony. He could grind through training, finally awaken a power, and still have zero way to prove it, because he didn't have the appraisal skill to confirm the ability even existed. The collector saw his chance, an opening to help without pity seeping into it. He told the boy, "You can get your appraisal from me, anytime you want, for free." It sounded simple, like a tiny kindness, but it would flip both their lives forever. And that's how their weird bond kicked off, because the collector kept showing up for repeat visits at the lonely cabin high in the snowy mountains, and the boy who used to glare at him now greeted him with a flash of surprise, calling him an absolute oddball for actually coming back. The collector showed up with paper and tools, then sat beside the now young man as he dragged through his brutal training, and he kept using his appraisal skill over and over, same outcome every time. But the young man still returned, and that steady presence gave him a little comfort and real companionship out in the lonely wilderness. 50 years after they first met, the story snaps back to the present. An old gray man lies sick in bed as the collector, who never seems to age, fusses over him, and when he finally wakes, he grins and cheers his longtime friend's return, happy as ever to see him again. The man snaps the collector back from a daze, and you can tell he's been drifting off into space, because the next second, those long-buried memories yank him right into the present, and he stares at his friend with the weight of time glaring on his face, while the collector somehow looks exactly the same. With a smug grin, the man sidesteps the conversation and brags. He excitedly tells the collector how he wiped out an intermediate monster with one single sword swing, then leans in and asks, "Do you think that's awesome?" Like he desperately needs someone to confirm he's getting stronger. The collector goes stone still, and that silence slams against the man's wild, boisterous energy. He bursts into laughter like it's still 50 years ago, back when he'd spent an entire night just to bring down one monster of that size. And suddenly, all the years they've shared feel heavy in the air, like time itself is pressing down on them. A brutal thought hits the collector as he stares at his aging friend, no longer young, just frail bones and tired breath, and it screams, what if chasing this impossible miracle, chasing this fantasy of awakening a skill, is going to get him killed? His fist clamps tight, resolve snapping into his face, because he won't let this spiral any farther. If his friend's life matters, he has to step in right now and stop him. But he's so wrapped up in his own burst of hope that he throws his arms wide like he's already won, shouting that every step is bringing him closer to awakening his skill, promising he'll light the way for everyone who's still unskilled. And now his dream isn't just his anymore, it's for all of them who are chasing the same fate. Hit by that bright, shining hope, the collector can't force out the cruel truth, so he blurts out a shaky yeah, a thin lie meant to keep his friend's spirit alive for one more second. But the second it leaves his mouth, the friend's smile cracks. He sees right through it and calls the collector out, straight up saying, "You're a terrible liar." A savage blizzard batters the mountain range, like the collector's rage is freezing into the sky, while the wind screams around that tiny, lonely cabin, pure, brutal nature that crushes the men inside no matter what they try. Huddled in a tavern at the mountain's base, the collector cradles a warm drink and watches the snow-covered path like it's judging him, replaying his loss, knowing he couldn't crush his friend's spirit again and again until he just couldn't bring himself to stop him. The bartender starts chatting and asks why someone like him is stuck in town, and the collector admits he came to visit a friend up in the nearby mountains, but a blizzard locked him in, leaving the bartender stunned that anyone even lives out there. Another patron overhears the chat and jumps in, piecing it together and pointing straight at the strange old man who lives up in the mountains, then drops the detail that travelers swear they've seen a muscular geezer battling monsters in the snowy peaks, and suddenly the collector's friend is no longer just someone's buddy, he's turned into a full-on local legend. The bartender's smile drops, his voice turns razor-sharp, and he tells the collector to steer clear of the mountains for now, because a savage monster has just shown up, so deadly the whole country issued an official warning, and suddenly that cozy tavern vibe turns into pure, creeping dread. Even with the warning posted, the patron says some adventurers still charged up that mountain, chasing glory or striking it rich. Then the tavern door slams open, and a bunch of terrified adventurers stumble in, shaking like they've seen a nightmare. People whisper about a vicious monster, a giant white, bipedal beast, maybe a yeti, and the collector can't help but wonder if his friend can actually beat something like that, because even though he's gotten strong, this feels like a whole other nightmare. The bartender snaps them back into reality, his voice shaking like a warning bell, saying the rumors claim the monster is triple the size of a yeti and can blast pure cold air, while the collector suddenly slams a handful of coins on the counter, worry etched hard across his face. Suddenly, a pack of adventurers crashes through the door, sprinting for their lives from the monster they were just talking about, screaming like crazy, because they've never seen anything that huge before, while a brutal snowstorm rages and a gigantic shadow swallows the trees. An old man plants his feet in the blizzard, sword bared, stepping between a monstrous threat and the terrified adventurers as he bellows at them to run, his roar smashing through the wind, because he plans to take this battle on by himself. The creature finally shows its true nightmare, a frost giant with a face like pure primal rage, and it spits out a brutal blast of ice and snow, unleashing a blizzard that slams straight into the small group of humans while they huddle in total, shaking terror. The old man plants his feet like a fortress, lifts his sword, and hurls his courage straight into the icy blast, screaming for everyone to back off as he vows to take the monster down alone, standing defiant as his silhouette clashes with the giant's crushing power. The frost giant thunders, blasting deadly cold with every breath, and the old man stares right back with a savage, unshakable grin, power clashing head-on with iron will as a lone human dares a mythical beast. The blizzard rages harder and harder, slashing whipping snow across a brutal, merciless wasteland, while the mountains roar as the wind screams like it wants blood. This is the worst possible arena for one last, desperate showdown. The collector rockets through a blinding snowstorm, dragging ragged breaths behind him, because he knows regular folk wouldn't dare take on a top-class monster from the giant tribe, while his friend is sprinting straight into a suicide brawl. He hammers his body harder and harder, because he knows this is hopeless. No full party of skilled adventurers can take a monster like this. And still, his friend, no skills at all, charges in to fight it solo like walking straight into a death sentence. As he sprints, he taps every last skill left to read the battlefield. Two huge signals blast ahead. One screams Frost Giant, but before he can even sort the other out, the man slams forward to charge the beast straight on. The old man isn't just fighting, he's forcing his awakening in the middle of a desperate life-or-death brawl. The frost giant hurls its massive arm like a wrecking ball, slapping the old man aside as if he's nothing. Then the brutal hit rockets him through the air and smashes him into the snow like he's been erased. The rescued adventurers cowered in the tree line, frozen in terror, utterly powerless, while the giant's sheer size crushed their hope, one leg as thick as an ancient tree trunk, and the old man's strike proved completely useless. The collector finally bursts onto the scene, eyes blazing with panic, then sprints straight for the fallen ventures, shouting like, "Are you okay?" While his biggest fear hits first, the innocent bystanders trapped in this brutal, monstrous fight. The battered old man hauls himself back up, bruised to the bone but refusing to break, and he roars at the collector to stay out of it. This monster is his and his alone. Rage and hope burn together in him, because he's convinced that if he wins right now, he'll finally earn the skill he's chased his whole life. With every last spark of strength in his broken-down body, the man unleashes a brutal, bone-rattling roar, and the frost giant actually flinches, stunned for a split second by the sheer force of that sound. It's the opening he's been waiting for. When the giant jerks back, mouth gaping in pure shock, he lunges in on a last, desperate spike of adrenaline, hurling himself into the air with his sword raised high, ready to slam down the deciding blow. He rams his blade with everything he's got straight into the frost giant's gaping maw, steel biting through flesh and bone, then launches a desperate, do-or-die strike meant to hit its brain. Absolute courage and total recklessness. The sword hits dead center, driving straight into the monster's head, yanking clean through its skull with a brutal final crunch. The blade rockets out the back of the frost giant's cranium, bursting through with a horrifying spray of black blood. Then the monster collapses as its life gets snuffed out by one flawless, perfectly placed strike. That brutal hit and the giant's death throes fling a shockwave right back through the sword. Then the old man gets blasted backward, his whole body screaming from the savage recoil. His body slams into the snow, a brutal burst of dark blood splattering across the untouched white. Game over, but the price was absolutely staggering. The adventurers gawk in pure shock as the frost giant crumples, still as death, with a killing wound from the old man's blade, and they can't even wrap their heads around it. A total nobody with no skills just cut down a monster their whole party couldn't touch. The collector barrels to his friend's side and finds him slumped against a leafless tree, life draining away by the second, wheezing for breath, looming over the dying man as snow around them turns crimson. The man cranes his neck toward the collector, his voice barely hanging on as he pleads for one last favor, begging him to use appraisal and judge whether his final desperate move was truly enough. The collector heartbreakingly warns him not to talk, saying his wounds are too severe, but the man won't stop. He staggers up and grabs the collector's hand, surprisingly strong for a dying man, and demands again what the result is. The collector's eyes brim with tears as he stares down at his friend, the one who chased an impossible dream for 50 relentless years. Choking back a sob, the collector hands his friend the last gift he has, a beautiful lie, and then congratulates him, voice shaking with emotion, swearing he's finally awakened to his skill, raw, untouched power. An old man's faint laugh slips out like pure joy, and he shuts his eyes for good, dying with a smile, convinced he'd finally won. The collector can't hold his grief back anymore. Tears pour down his face as he grabs his friend's hand, his whole body trembling with quiet, broken sobs, mourning a truly unforgettable man. He leans over the lifeless body and chokes out a whisper, drowning in grief, then spits out the truth, calling his friend a terrible liar, just like the man had done to him, because that final gut-wrenching moment proves how they both kept feeding those lies to guard their beautiful dream. The collector hauls the dead man's body through the snow, dragging it away from the battle scene while the adventurers stare, frozen in stunned silence, and from a nearby cave, a whole flock of birds bursts into the sky, spooked by the lingering stench of death. He slings his injured friend over his shoulders, and the man's blood soaks his clothes as he stumbles onward, face twisted with deep grief and pure exhaustion, pushing through to finally reach the place his friend once called home. He comes back to that tiny loamy log cabin, and the whole place feels like a silent tribute to years of non-stop grit and unbreakable hope, while snow drifts down, soft as a blessing, smothering the world in white. Just as he sets up a grave, his eyes catch something propped by the cabin wall, a crude wooden post, with a shovel waiting right beside it, like the man had been bracing for his own final day. He stares at the post, and etched into the wood he spots a name the man picked for himself, Inept Man. The collector goes still, stunned by the truth. His friend carved his own grave marker, daring the only thing he couldn't beat to become his legacy. But the collector slams his head side to side and refuses to buy this final self-assessment, knife in hand, knuckles white, and insists his friend wasn't inept at all, because he'd watched him live his whole life with more courage and drive than anyone he'd ever met. Memories hit him like lightning, seeing himself as a defiant kid, a tireless warrior, a hopeful elder, and it wasn't his lack of skills that defined him. He was way more than that. The collector finally sees the truth about his friend. This wasn't just hope, it was a whole force of nature. He was kind, he wouldn't bow to the fate he was handed, and he fought his own limits with everything he had right up until his final breath. With steady purpose, the collector brings his knife to the grave marker, and right over the name Ain'tman, he chisels a brand new title, an honest goodbye for his friend, carving the word, outstanding. He jams the finished marker into the snowy ground, then crumples to the earth, his head thudding against his pack, done everything he can for the friend who's been by his side for 50 years. He finally stumbles away from the lonely grave, glancing back one last time like it might answer him, Then he vows to come back when spring rolls in and brings fresh flowers. With that promise hanging in the air, he hauls himself off the mountain, letting the outstanding, inept man fade into peace. Later, once the snow finally gives up and flowers burst through the ground, a lone cabin sits silent in the mountains. Then her boots stomp into view beside a fresh bouquet left at the grave. Blonde Twintails girl crouches by a weird grave marker, mouths the words out loud, "Outstanding inept man," then erupts in laughter, totally stunned that anyone would dare write something that odd. She whips around to her companion, the woman with the long, lighter blonde hair, and demands her opinion, then calls her older sister to back her up, insisting the whole idea is absurd and the grave is a joke. The older sister stares at the grave, her smile soft and calm, and she quietly nods, fully agreeing with her younger sister's take. Her smile curdles into something icy and vicious, her eyes blazing with contempt as she snaps, cold as death, "People born without talent, just trash." He sat alone, staring into the truth of his own job, because in this world, your skills decide your value, your fate, your worth. And since he was the collector, he hunted exactly those abilities for a living, a line of work that had already shown him the very best and the most brutal worst of humanity. The weight of his recent ordeal bore down on him, his brow knotted tight as dark thoughts churned. A grim truth hit him hard: this road couldn't last, and something had to change, because the faces of the men he'd crossed kept flashing in his mind, eyes twisted in desperate pain, proving just how vicious the dark side of his collections really was. Right then, a bright, cheerful voice snapped him out of his gloomy thoughts, when the diner owner rolled up to his table with a warm grin, thrilled that the collector was here so soon after they opened, and slid a steaming plate of food in front of him. He spun his head through the roaring room of laughing patrons and non-stop clinks of silverware, and the owner's face lit up. She told him she was forever grateful, because this place could only exist thanks to his help. She sighed that she couldn't spoil him with fancy hospitality, while a heap of dirty plates piled up behind her, proof they were swamped. He waved it off, telling her not to fret, and he honestly smiled at how much that simple meal meant. The owner admitted they'd been drowning with too few staff, but then, boom, the tide finally turned. They just hired a brand new kid who was insanely earnest and relentlessly hardworking to help out. Right on cue, a bright, energetic girl burst into view with sparkling eyes, and her status clued everyone in she had the rare skill. Good luck, LV. She bustled over with a tray piled high with just steamed buns, practically bouncing with excitement in her brand new uniform, still a little clumsy, but trying hard. When she slid up to his table, her eyes went wide with shock, and her mouth fell open as "Name Collector" slipped out in a whisper. He froze too, staring back like he'd just recognized her face. It all snapped into place when it hit him. This was the flower-selling girl he'd handed the diner flyer to. She'd de-changed so much in that waitress uniform that he almost didn't recognize her, and the moment he saw her, she looked brighter, steadier, like she'd finally found her footing. She practically bombarded him with thanks, then offered him the steamed buns she was carrying as a little thank you. He politely turned down the buns, saying he was only there for a real meal, and she snapped to the lunch menu, "Try the Salisbury steak," while he watched other happy customers dig in. He told her he'd try it on his next visit since he'd just come back from a grueling trip and only wanted to crash. Then he let out a quiet sigh, and she told him to take his time and relax, no pressure at all. As she slipped back into her duties, she couldn't stop herself. She whipped a glance over at him, alone at his table, a lone figure swallowed by thought. His thoughts slipped into the dark truths of his job, how life keeps charging ahead even when death stares you down. Once he figured he'd already earned enough skill for the day, he decided to buy flowers, then froze, because the flower girl's usual street stall was gone without a trace. Later, as he strolled through town, he ran into her again, only this time she held a basket piled high with fresh blossoms. He asked if she was still selling flowers in the evenings, and she grinned, telling him she grows them in her own garden at home to bring in a little extra money for her family. Relief hit him like a wave the moment he told her, "This is perfect timing. I've been trying to buy flowers for a friend." She clocked the gloomy look on his face and paused for a beat, then asked softly if he'd eaten dinner yet. He blinked in surprise, then admitted he hadn't. Heat raced across her cheeks as she nervously, but honestly, invited him over for dinner, and she lit up telling him her mother had a cultivation skill that made the garden grow vegetables so ridiculously delicious. She told him she'd clocked how crushed he looked earlier that afternoon, and she was sure that a warm, homemade meal with her family could pull him out of that slump. He got blindsided. Her sharp perception and real kindness hit him so hard he realized she'd been watching him way more closely than he ever gave her credit for. She hurried to explain that paying him back was her plan too, after he helped her land that job at the diner, even if her place was tiny and worn out. Her sincerity hit him hard, and he gratefully took her up on it. As dusk spilled over the town, they strolled down a lonely dirt road, slipping away from the noise, while the first evening stars winked into the darkening sky. As they strolled, she kept showering him with praise for how effortlessly he could talk, and the whole trip felt light and easy, while she had no idea that every smooth word, every acting-ready line, was part of a polished charm he'd learned to perfect for the job. Soon they stumbled up to a tiny, weather-beaten wooden house, patched up with boards over the windows, and she lit up with a bright, proud smile the second they arrived, announcing, "This is my home." Right next to the house, a tiny garden thrived, neat rows of vegetables standing tall like proof that her mother's hands were pure skill and non-stop devotion. The moment they slipped through the doorway, his night vision lit up every tiny detail of the perfectly kept garden, crystal clear. Then Violet shouted, "I'm home," and said she'd brought the collector for dinner, right as a warm, feminine voice called from inside. Inside, her mom and two little kids, one boy, one girl, lit up as they stared at him with wide, curious eyes, and the mother hurried over, apologizing for the plain welcome, saying she would have cooked up something far more special if she'd known her daughter was bringing home the big guy she'd been bragging about. Violet rushed to introduce her family, and the collector bowed with perfect manners, then introduced himself too, while her mother insisted he sit down and get comfortable as she started cooking. Violet hurried into the kitchen, already offering to help, and told her younger siblings she'd invited the collector just to lift his spirits. Two kids, eyes wide, curiosity roaring, crowded around him and demanded, "So what does a collector really do?" He grinned warmly, saying their big sister had already spilled some truth about him and his brand new job. He broke it down in plain words: he's a world traveler, trading and collecting skills people don't even need anymore, and the kids' jaws hit the floor with pure awe while their mother, right in the back, stopped mid-scene, shocked and listening hard. Their eyes flared with desperate hope, and the kids practically begged him to buy their skills, telling him their family was dirt poor, and that the free appraisal service hadn't shown up in their town for years, so they didn't even know what they could do. When he caught the sincerity in their eyes, he stepped in and offered to use his appraisal skill to test their abilities, on him, for free. His mother's face tightened with worry, but before she could even finish her hesitation, the kids were already tugging him forward, begging him to go, their excitement drowning out every fear. He stopped mid-thought, weighing every nightmare this appraisal could unleash, because he knew a bad or useless skill could shatter a kid's spirit in one brutal moment, so he braced himself for the worst. The appraisal snapped into focus. This boy was all grit and speed on his feet, while the girl brought razor-sharp calculation and deadly awareness of what was around her. Then he flashed the anxious mother a steady smile, telling her both her children were genuinely gifted and that she had nothing to fear. While the mom murmured to her daughter in stunned relief, the collector's mind snapped back to one thing: Violet. He clung to her skill, her lucky break, and the memory of the day they met, when he bought every last flower she had, just to see her smile. That kindness lit the fuse, nudging her onto this brand new path, like fate finally decided to step in. He knew her life had never been easy, and she wasn't gifted with the same terrifying skills as her siblings. But lately, her chronic asthma had been easing up, almost like fate was blinking. And that day, he didn't just buy her flowers. He handed her more than double their worth, betting on a future that was already starting to pay him back. Soon, a delicious little feast was set on the small wooden table, big steaming stew in the middle, flanked by bowls of crisp salad and fresh, colorful vegetables. The whole family burst into bright, grateful cheers, their happy voices swelling through the cozy little home as they dove headfirst into their food. The moment he took that first bite, the flavor hit him like a bolt, no fancy twists, just plain, cozy goodness that absolutely blew his mind. As he watched that happy family chow down and crack up together, it hit him. This wasn't just food, it was pure love, the one thing money could never buy. Memories crashed into him like a tidal wave, sharp and brutal against the cozy comfort of this table, dragging him back to cold, lonely meals in glittering halls and that icy memory of a blonde woman, a past that felt light years away from this humble home. Violet caught him freezing for a split second, her brow knitting as she blurted, "What's wrong, didn't you like the food?" And he jerked out of his daze fast, snapping back that the meal was absolutely delicious. After that joy-filled dinner, the mother spotted her kids' eyes drooping from all the excitement, so she turned to the collector and asked if he'd spin some travel stories as bedtime tales, and he agreed without a second thought. Soft moonlight spilled through the kid's bedroom window, stretching razor-long shadows across the floor. Right after he spun that wild story about a forest and a dragon, the two kids snuggled into their shared bed and begged him for one last favor before he left. With wide, hopeful eyes, they begged him to buy their skills, swearing their family was broke and that selling them was the only way they could ease things for their poor mother and little sister. A rush of emotion hit him when he saw their small, sincere faces, and the way they poured their hearts into their family left him overwhelmed, even as a nasty, powerful jealousy clawed at him. He reached out and laid a tender hand on each of their heads, speaking in a calm, steady voice about why he was there, only collecting skills that nobody needs or that can hurt people, while theirs would only grow stronger with them and become essential in their future. Then he swore them a solemn promise: if the day ever came when they were truly desperate for money, they could track him down and come find him. He stepped out of the bedroom, and Violet's mother was right there, beaming as she thanked him for tucking in the kids and for the kindness he'd shown Violet. He just flashed a warm smile, brushed her gratitude away with a soft wave. Her smile vanished into a hard, serious stare, and then she hit him with a shocking request of her own. Would he buy her skills? She admitted that seeing Violet so much happier lately nearly thrilled her to death, but deep down she still felt like dead weight on her children. He stared at her, frozen in shock, while she boldly asked for the exact same deal as her kids, ready to trade away her own abilities just to save a little money and lessen her family's struggle. When he caught her steady gaze, he told her this job had shown him countless families, but he'd never seen a home this joyful. Then he admitted the warmth was so clean and bright it almost blinded him. He said he only takes requests from people who are truly sick of being haunted by their own skills, because the moment a skill shows up, it can rip apart someone's whole life. He made it crystal clear, he doesn't just buy skills with a one-time payment. He wasn't here to hand over money, because he knew happiness like that can't be bought. But the mother kept listening, her face turning softer with understanding, and then he finally spilled the truth, something only he could feel, confessing that he was secretly jealous of the happiness her whole family shared. Right then, Violet burst in from the doorway, grabbed her mother's attention, and ripped into her for being way too forward with their guest. Blushing hard, Violet snapped that her mother was saying weird stuff, and warned that the collector would get bothered, because once she locks onto an idea, she turns annoyingly pushy fast. A real no-act smile burst onto the collector's face as he watched the goofy family squabble like they meant the world to each other. And in that moment, being here with this simple, loving crew somehow lifted him way higher than he ever expected, while the jealousy in his chest burned hot, because he was craving something he'd never even known how to ask for. As he finally stepped out of that tiny, warm house and into the cool night air, he paused, because the comfort still lingered, but so did the strange, uneasy ache he couldn't explain. Violet trailed after him, apologizing again for her mother's behavior, and straight from the heart told him he could visit them anytime he wanted. She met his gaze with earnest eyes and swore that if he ever crashed again, he could count on her. She'd do whatever it took to be useful to him. He snapped his gaze away and stared up at the starry sky, wrestling with her offer, because a warm home felt like a bright, impossible dream for someone like him. He thanked her softly, and that quiet thank you carried a gratitude no words could fully hold. As he strode into the black, he watched moths swirl around a faraway lantern, and for a heartbeat he felt like one of them, like his own soul was a moth, doomed to chase the light when darkness calls. It was a light he'd only just stumbled upon, and as he kept walking alone, he couldn't stop asking himself, was it really okay to be this captivated by it, this desperate to reach for it? She flashed a sly smile, clocked her moves in a split second, and knew her older sister would never miss something this huge, so she stuck close to Ripley, stirring up a distraction big enough to yank her sister's attention and force them back together. Meanwhile, the young man's whole body shook like it was about to break, one wild twinge of fear, an aching longing crashing the second he thought about seeing his elder sister again. He dropped into a low crouch, white-knuckled, trying to hold himself steady against the crushing emotion. Ripley's head snapped up in an instant, eyes blazing with horror she'd felt before, because the ground under them buckled and shook, rolling out a brutal rumble that screamed, "Here we go again," and she clenched her teeth, recognizing the catastrophe's first ugly signs as it started all over. Her companions fought to stay on their feet, stumbling as the tremors roared louder and the ground lurched under him. Then he snapped his gaze to her, face drained of color, demanding if this brutal earthquake was exactly what she'd been warning him about, because the whole disaster was spiraling way faster than he ever thought possible. Ripley's face twisted with raw anguish as the brutal truth hit again. The cave entrance caved in, and the sealed monsters poured out in a screaming swarm. She felt death closing in, and dread swallowed her for the villagers, thinking, how on earth can just the two of us fight something this huge? His memories hit him like a collapsing building, failed again, screamed again in his head. This was his fourth death, and every brutal loop always ended the same way, Ripley's spirit getting sacrificed for the quest. Then it clicked hard and ugly, keeping the hunt for his sister going, while the whole world gets stuck because of Ripley's power felt like cruelty with a heartbeat. Ripley refused to fold under despair. She snapped her gaze on him, blazing with pure grit, and said her skills were her merch, ready for a steal. Then she leaned in with fire in her eyes and begged, "Let's fight together." vowing that if they fused their strengths, they'd finally smash the monsters and shatter the endless cycle. Right in front of them, the real nightmare finally showed itself, a colossal dark seal, carved into the cave wall, its twisted rune breathing out evil as it pulsed, then cracked and shattered to pieces, the barrier holding the darkness collapsing instantly, and as the last scraps of magic died out, a freezing chill swallowed the air. From the cave's dark mouth, a nightmare army burst out into the world, slimy blobs oozing and slithering beside winged horrors with one staring eye, while horned demons bared gaping maws and screamed into the daylight. A monstrous tide slammed forward, claws ripping, fangs bared, spreading across the land at an unreal pace like a blink-and-you-miss-it nightmare, and sheer numbers crushed even the bravest hearts, turning that peaceful countryside into a target in the blink of an eye. Turning to her companion, Ripley swallowed her pride and apologized. This was all she had right now, then thrust her hand out and offered to sell him some of her offensive skills, swearing that if this moment was going to decide everything, that would have to be enough to give them a real fighting chance. The moment their hands locked together, the deal snapped into place, and a wild burst of shimmering light tore through the space between them. Then glowing panels erupted in midair, spelling out the insane abilities being transferred. Advanced swordsmanship, razor-sharp perception, stronger physical power, unbreakable tenacity, and even his own return by death, and he just froze there, eyes bulging, staring at the massive power now coursing through his body. Fresh confidence detonated in his chest. He clenched his fist and felt real power hit him for the first time. With steel in his voice, he swore he could take on the swarm, flip his cruel fate on its head, and keep his village from getting wiped out. Then he spun to Ripley and demanded a weapon he could use to put these new skills to work. Ripley shot him a hard stare, disbelief and pure frustration boiling in her eyes. Then she scoffed at his sudden swagger, bluntly asking if the idea of just running away to dodge death had ever even crossed his mind. Right away, she tore that thought to pieces, calling it the most pointless, cowardly escape for a problem that needed a true warrior's grit. She watched him clocking that steel spine resolve to save his home, and sure, she got why he'd fight so hard, but deep down, dread curled up in her chest, because those lofty ideals might be exactly what destroys him, the second he lets his guard down. Then she cut through the air with ice-cold finality. She would never flee, not while this is all she has, her only skill, her identity, her curse, all knotted to this endless war. With his fresh powers burning in his veins, the young man squared his shoulders and charged straight at the looming nightmare, swearing that if fate really could be rewound, he'd use it to shield his village from the monstrous swarm. He didn't sugarcoat it. The cave ahead was packed with low and intermediate-class monsters, and he'd even spotted a high-class monster lurking in the mix. As they closed in, the nightmare behind his words hit like a wave. This cave mouth was packed with grotesque guards, bat-like monsters with bulging, dripping eyes and slimy abominations all lined up, staring down the two newcomers like they were about to unleash a fast, brutal showdown. He froze for a heartbeat, replaying the rules of their cursed game like a mental diagram, because he knew that if Ripley died this time, the world would slam the rewind button and jump back a full 24 hours, yet every hard-won skill and scrap of knowledge would come with them, handing them a deadly advantage in the next loop. Ripley burst into the chaos, her sword flashing silver as she crashed into the first wave of enemies, then dread hit her hard. If she fell right here, she'd lose the skills she just sold to him, and her sacrifice in this timeline would turn into nothing. The stakes were sky-high, not just for the world, but for her own future too. She tore across the battlefield at a speed no one could explain, slipping between blows like a ghost, eyes locked on the next move as she knew one wrong step would snap everything back to disaster, way worse than every loop before it. With her enhanced powers fully unleashed, she became a blazing hurricane, sword in hand, slicing through the monster ranks as her blade whirled like a dance. Her sharpened perception made every strike feel unstoppable, like the enemies were stuck in slow motion. Then she barked, bold and fearless, telling her partner to step back and leave these monsters to her. Not about to back down, the protagonist surged forward, his right hand snapping into a roaring flame vortex as he blurted out their battle plan. He'd unleash his saved fire magic to torch the weaker low-class monsters to ash, while Ripley carved through the deadlier intermediate-class threats. Ripley didn't even have time to breathe. Beasts snapped into a tight circle around her, snarling from every side. To her left, a hulking monster crouched and growled, razor teeth flashing. To her right, a many-limbed nightmare stared her down. She planted her feet, sword up and ready, bracing for the full hit coming at her. She pivoted on a dime, her blade slicing a razor-clean arc to stop a monster that lunged for her back, and the way she moved, sharp, perfect, lethal, proved the skills flooding her veins didn't belong to fate anymore. She was done being prey and started forging her own destiny. A colossal horned beast crashed down with a brutal clawed slash meant to rip her in half, so Ripley dropped low at the last second, and those lethal claws sliced through the air just above her head, whistling harmlessly past, almost. A thin gash opened on her cheek, and that razor-close cut screamed, loud and clear, that death was just one heartbeat away. As the fight exploded around him, the protagonist flashed a fierce, unshakable grin. Fresh cuts on his face didn't even faze him. He told himself that this kind of wound was nothing, just a tiny scrape compared to the terrifying finality of dying. Years of dealing with the return by death's skill had turned his fear into something he couldn't break. He thrust his hand forward and blasted a wave of black-tinged fire, wiping out the last of the low-class slimes and turning them to ash in a blink. Then he hollered for Ripley to check on her, said he was done, and declared he was heading straight to join her fight. Bleeding and buzzing with adrenaline, Ripley burst out a triumphant shout, screaming that the collector's skills had made her feel untouchable, like nothing on earth could stop her anymore. And for the first time, hope lit up her face as she swore she'd finally take control and rewrite her fate. Right when Ripley thought she'd won, a dark shadow crushed the moment. Out of the cliffside rocks, a colossal stone golem erupted, towering and monstrous, and before she could even blink, its jagged jaws snapped open and slammed shut, gobbling her whole with an earth-shattering crunch. The whole world seemed to freeze as the battlefield noise drowned away, leaving only the brutal silence in his ears. Then, in a nightmare of terror, he clawed out her name with a scream, his voice swallowed by the emptiness she left behind. His eyes stayed locked on the chaos as the clues snapped together with ruthless certainty. Then it hit him. That hulking monster bursting from the cave, wrapped in brutal earth armor, was exactly what killed Ripley in the timeline that just got wiped clean. Ripley wasn't playing the victim anymore. He ripped out his blade with fierce resolve and swore he'd take down the beast, letting everyone see he'd already sharpened his stock skills, primed to jump in and help the second things went sideways. He tore into the chaos, white and black streaking past those monstrous stone figures, and his sword snapped down like a silver meteor, smashing straight into the creature's brutal rocky hide. With his voice shaking from grit and rage, he bellowed his defiance, not just at the monster, but at the cruel fate that had trapped him, and swore he'd rewrite his own destiny with his bare hands, saving his whole village in the process. When his blade crashed into the golem's brutal shell, a wave of dark energy and jagged rock shards exploded outward, and the battlefield rang with a brutal shatter, proof that this power was finally his, and nothing could break his will. He tilted his head and shot the collector a sharp, knowing look, then leaned in and demanded he witness what his one skill really could do, the kind of power that could rewrite reality itself. A tiny, triumphant grin flickered across Ripley's lips as the last immediate threat crumbled into dust, and in that breathless silence, something hit him like lightning. He just knew, with zero doubt, that fate had finally been rewritten. The sun burned across the rolling hills, painting long shadows as the path ahead finally lay safe, calm rolling over everything after that brutal life-or-death clash. Back in the village, everything slid along in eerie, peaceful normal, villagers going about their days, blissfully clueless that disaster had just been dodged by a hair's breadth. With her two saviors at her side, Lee grinned so wide it felt like the whole world caught fire. She said it was unreal how strange it felt, because after all this time, things were finally moving forward like they were supposed to, and that simple truth hit like 1,000 tons. She spun toward the collector, tears of gratitude shining in her eyes, and told him she couldn't thank him enough. Because of his help, she and everyone else were pulled back from a fate that would have been nothing short of dreadful. The brutal strain of that endless loop finally slammed into Ripley, and his body crumpled as he pressed against the collector just to stay upright. Then he blurted the nightmare truth of his power. To win, he had to die again and again, at least 4 times, trapped in a cycle of agony that nearly shattered him. With desperation blazing in his voice, Ripley begged the collector to buy his power. He admitted that mind control was a pain, then pleaded for the collector to take it by death, because the collector could stash it outside his normal slots and didn't care about money. He trembled as he thrust his hands forward, begging to sell the one skill he had, a move so desperate it felt doomed, while the collector just stared, face locked tight as he measured the full weight of that cursed power. With zero hesitation, the collector locked in his choice, one decision that would rewrite both their futures. He agreed to the deal on the spot. He'd buy the one skill, return by death, but he'd pay for it for free, sealing the pact like it was fate. As they sat down to perform the transfer, disaster hit like a brick wall. Then the collector admitted he'd tried it before, and with his trading skill stuck at level 1, it was way too weak to pull off an only skill, crushing Ripley with total shock and despair. The last bit of Ripley's control snapped, his voice shaking as he finally spilled the truth. This curse is pure nightmare fuel. He admitted that as long as he has this power, he's trapped. He'll never be able to truly die, forced to endure an endless, waking eternity he can't break free from. His mind dove into a nightmare spiral, picturing futures where torment never ends, and he couldn't stop asking, If he dies from some slow, brutal illness, will he be forced to off himself every day just to rewind time? A lonely loop, and one day it could swallow the whole world. He snapped back to the present, blurted out an apology for his outburst, and swore that his awful fate wasn't the collector's fault. Then he tried to take it all back, but the weight of that confession sat there, crushing the space between them. The collector wouldn't let him carry that weight alone. He stepped in, bowed his head, and declared with iron certainty that it was his fault and his fault alone because his trading skills weren't strong enough to save the day. A brutal rule from their world weighed down that failed trade. Skills never evolve here unless they're constantly used, so everyone agreed on one cold truth. No one ever stories about leveling up because they're trapped at level 1 forever. The collector couldn't even begin to measure how big Ripley's terror really was, because if the world kept looping for him, dying would never stop chasing him, and sooner or later, someone crueler would finally clock just how dangerous his power is. Dread crept into his mind as he pictured one nightmare after another. If Ripley's secret fell into the wrong hands, someone could keep him locked up, killing him again and again just to twist fate, trapping him in endless torture, and that's when self-hatred hit like a truck, making him question why he even exists and hate himself for failing to stop it. From that crushing despair, a wild new thought ignited in his head. If skills truly have levels, then he can push his to level 2. That idea snapped into focus and became his mission, perfectly aligned with why he started collecting in the first place. Sharpen his skill until he's strong enough to finally face the one person he's chasing. His eyes looked dead-rippled, and with iron certainty he swore a solemn vow, admitting he couldn't help right now, then pledged he'd de-level his trading up to 2, and once he did, he'd finally buy return by death. A memory of his dearest friend slammed into his mind, someone who fought tooth and nail all the way to the bitter end, and he realized one thing: if he quit now, while that tiny shred of hope was still alive, he'd be spitting on his friend's legacy. Ripley froze at that declaration, like how could his power level up when he never even thought it was possible? He didn't fully understand the mechanics of his own abilities, but he tightened his fist, eyes sharpening with fresh resolve, refusing to drown in self-pity. Right before they split, Ripley leaned in and made his own deal. Tell me when your power starts feeling like too much and I'll come running. A vow to trade strength, no questions. The collector just stood there on the path, stunned, still trying to wrap his head around a power that could resurrect him through death. He spun around and strode off, his boots thumping up dust from the dirt road, and he couldn't stop thinking. Skills were the real troublemakers, always hiding surprises. Still, with that bizarre encounter behind him, time finally lurched forward for real. His eyes hardened and a wild new fire ignited inside him, sharpening his purpose. The days of drifting around as a skill collector, hunting for his sister, were done. Now he had a far more urgent, far tougher mission to chase. Then it hit him one brutal truth. If time can't move forward, the future dies, and the chance of ever seeing her again vanishes with it. The town square is buzzing, merchants shouting, citizens streaming by, and it feels like home to the young man weaving through the crowd. He's a collector, a trader in one wild, powerful thing. Skills swapping the very abilities that shape a person's life and their work. A random acquaintance yells his name, and you can hear the shock in it when he spots the collector isn't at his usual job. Then the collector flashes a calm, knowing grin and tells him straight up he's taking the day off for something private. He grips a sealed, official letter in his hand, and the note bluntly says a regular client has demanded he show up. Then he strides up well-kept stone steps as the streets get richer and flashier, announcing the wealthier part of the city the moment he crosses in. His eyes lock on a grand estate ahead, massive doors looming like a fortress. When he announces his arrival, he can't help but glance at a battered poster on the wall, screaming, "Arena Match," and that small detail basically reveals the kind of powerhouse he's come to see. Right before anyone can welcome him, boom, something monstrous detonates from inside, like immense power finally breaking free. There, in the middle of an earth-shaking strike, stands a man built like stone, hair burning like fire, and his training is so brutal it rattles the whole building to its core. Leon, the arena's champion, whirls around and greets the collector with a warm, familiar grin, his training instantly slipping out of his mind, while a second muscular man stands right beside him, staring at the arrival with raw awe and a tight, nervous edge. Leondold tells Kongyus that the monster attraction skill he bought from the collector has been a total game-changer for his training, letting him sharpen his abilities nonstop, and then he points at Kongyus like, "Yeah, the collector helped me with you too," with pure pride. As Leondold casually asks who Kongus has brought with him, his friend's mask slips fast, his calm crumbles, because the real reason he's here hits like a truck, and every eye snaps to the collector. That's the whole truth behind this weird meeting. In a last-ditch panic, Kongus surges forward, clamps onto the collector's hands with shockingly fierce strength, and blurts out a shaky, tearful plea. sell him the cooking skill for his new wife, and he'll pay any price, no questions asked. The collector's eyes widen at this wild, public spectacle, and he quietly reminds the champion of their deal to handle every skilled trade in total secrecy. Then he keeps his cool and asks, "So what in the world could make someone beg like this in the open?" Leon Dole just laughs it away, telling the collector, "It's all good. Congus is my dearest friend, not some random stranger." Then he urges them to grab a comfier spot so they can finally hear the full story behind this wild request. They move into a fancy sitting room inside the grand house, and a tray of drinks lands there to calm the tension. Just as all three men drop into their seats, the air heavy with unspoken anxiety and sharp curiosity. Congus takes a slow, careful sip, his brow knotted with deep trouble as he watches his friends suffer, and the collector leans in, nudging him to spill the truth and explain why he's drowning in desperation. A shy blush tints Congus's cheeks as he kicks off his story. He's just gotten married to a wonderful, lovely woman, and while he fights and adventures to provide, she's fully thrown herself into being a housewife, giving her absolute all in this brand new life. The collector calmly argues that cooking isn't magic. It's a skill you can grind into yourself with simple practice, and buying it outright would cost a fortune. But Congus's face twists in agony as he blurts, "She's hopeless, her cooking is so awful, I've got no choice but to hand her the skill." He cringes as he recounts her cooking, saying she never measures a thing and her taste is completely wrecked. So when the food comes out way too salty, she fixes it by dumping in more sugar, and somehow turns it into a level of terrible that shouldn't even be possible. Congus is wrecked by emotion, whining that the food tastes like pure misery, yet his wife won't hear it, insisting she must cook everything from scratch because every bite is her love poured into the pot. And the collector finally presses the obvious question, whether Congus has told her how he really feels. The fighter's resolve shatters. A flash of his wife's sweet, smiling face hits him like a punch, so he swears he'll never find the words to hurt her like that, but panic tightens around him as he realizes he's trapped, staring down a lifetime of her horrible cooking with no escape in sight. Landold watched with a half-smile, saying he got the joke, yet he couldn't believe Congus, so fearless, got knocked out by one meal, while the collector just shrugged like, "Yeah, I figured you wouldn't get it with talk," then ordered Congus to bring a sample of the food today. A plain, neatly wrapped lunchbox slid onto the table between them, looking harmless, yet hiding pure doom, like a Pandora's box waiting to unleash a full-on culinary disaster. Right as the collector reaches for the lid, his intuition slams into him, level 30 now, and it screams one thing, "Run." He blurts the truth to the others, shaking with real fear, because if even the arena's toughest champion gets scared by the food inside, then what's under that lid has to be something straight-up monstrous. The moment his fingers graze the box, Congus explodes, shouting for him to stop and air it out first, because the instant after, a sick, undeniable wave of wrong pours out of the container, forcing the collector to kick in every defense he's got, from defensive skills to poison resistance and more. The lid pops open and boom, Lovecraftian nightmare fuel, writhing octopus tentacles, weird spotted mushrooms, and slimy, throbbing black orbs arranged like some disgusting bento box parody. The whole group jerks back, faces drained and sickened by what they see, and Congus grimaces as he tells them his wife sweetly names it, the overflowing bliss of paradise, even though deep down, he's calling it the overflowing horror of hell. Leontold looked sick to his stomach and blurted the question everyone was scared to ask, did his wife really eat it herself? Congus just slumped and nodded, like he'd lost the will to argue, confirming she chows it down without a single problem, and that answer makes the whole thing even more horrifying and weird. With hope hanging on by a thread, the collector blurts out, "What if it's ugly but secretly tastes fine?" And Leontold, fearless champion that he is, steels himself, snatches a fork, and goes straight for that horrifying dish to prove it. He brings the piece to his lips, takes a tiny shaky bite, and the second he tastes it, his face contorts in instant disgust. Then he gasps out the only truth he can manage. It probably won't kill him right away. That grim truth hits harder when Congus admits he's got serious poison resistance, and that's the only reason he can stand the taste after all this time. This isn't just bad food, it's the kind that can actually hurt you to swallow. The collector's mind starts sprinting, snapping connections together. This kind of culinary disaster feels downright unnatural, like it's way past what any amateur could pull off. He turns to Congus and demands, "Have you ever checked your wife's skill certificate?" Because in his head, only one thing explains this level of failure, a brutally strong negative skill. Kong's eyes went wide and he admitted he'd had the same thought. Then he remembered asking his wife to show his skill certificate, the one she supposedly earned at 10, only for her to shut him down and refuse flat out for some reason. He says that even when he offered to use his own appraisal skill to verify things for her, she still slammed the door in his face. Her stubborn secrecy only thickened the mystery and ramped up his worry. Clever ideas flared in Leon Dole's eyes, and he laid out his plan: throw a home party and invite Congus, wife, so the collector can slip in close enough to use his deadly appraisal skills without her ever seeing it coming. The collector rubs his chin in deep thought, nodding along with the plan, then leans in with a new idea. He knows an expert cook and wants to invite her too, convinced her skills will be absolutely priceless. The day of the party finally hits, sky blazing bright, everything perfect for a cheerful hangout, while it secretly hides a far darker, clandestine agenda. The collector darts across the city rooftops, silent, sharp, and fast, closing in on the champion's massive, jaw-dropping estate. He's with Sumir, the diner's talented cook, and she keeps smoothing her hair while scanning the room with jittery eyes, because this is her absolute first home party ever. He shoots her a calming smile and apologizes for dragging her in on such short notice, then explains it plain. Her cooking is so damn exceptional that he just knew she was the only person he could trust to help him handle this touchy situation. From his high balcony, Leondold spots them pulling up, flashes a grin, and lifts his glass in a big, bright welcome. Then he bellows down, telling them they've been waiting, his booming hospitality echoing everywhere. The party inside is already roaring, guests packed in, music blasting, when Leondold tells everyone to enjoy themselves, and just then the late arrival bursts in, apologizing up a storm the moment he speaks. Kongi strides in with a stunning woman on his arm, and before he can even catch his breath, she gently scolds him for taking forever to pick out a gift. Her voice is as beautiful as her long, flowing brown hair and her kind, gentle face. She steps forward, clutching a stunning bouquet of lilies, introduces herself to the group with effortless grace, and bam, her presence lights up the whole room, leaving everyone stunned into silence. She steps up with grace and introduces herself as Sailor Fairy, Congus, wife, then gives a perfect bow and politely thanks everyone for always looking after her husband. The collector goes totally speechless, his brain spinning, because he can't make his mind accept that this classy, gorgeous woman could possibly be the same person who created the hellish lunchbox. He even thinks she's way too good for Congus. Then Leon Dahl leans in and drops the bombshell. She was the one who chased him first. With his resolve set in stone, the collector locks in his stare and fires off his brutal appraisal skill. Now he's going to expose the truth behind her disastrous cooking, once and for all. The appraisal results hit his eyes like a slap, her creativity ranked at 18, her skills laid bare and her tastelessness, blowing past level 25, and that calm, serene smile is just a mask hiding the chaos she can unleash. Suddenly, the whole disaster clicks. Pair a top-tier creativity gift with pure tastelessness, and you've got a recipe for total culinary wreckage, where her good intentions get twisted into monstrous creations. But then his appraisal hits him with a shock. There's a third skill, and it stops him dead. He snaps his gaze from the floating text to her warm smile, and suddenly one crushing question hangs in the air. What secret is she really hiding? He instantly realizes this discovery is way too dangerous to spill in a room full of people, so he has to pull her aside and talk in private, far from anyone snooping. QC Laffery strides up to him like she's been sent, and once she drops the news that Congus spilled everything about him, she smiles and asks, just when he gets a breather, if she can talk with him outside about her skills. Right then, a wineglass slips off a nearby table and smashes to the floor with a thunderous crash, shocking the party guests into a tense, breath-stopping silence. The collector steers the sea life out of the buzzing party room and straight onto the calm, lamplit street, and from the doorway Kongus watches them go, hope bright in his eyes, dread heavy in his gut. The second they're alone, the collector wastes no time. He lays it out that his job gives him appraisal powers, and he already knows what she can do. Then Laffery snaps her gaze away, her shoulders dropping as she swings the door beside her. Without warning, she crumples onto the stone steps, chin to the ground, trembling as she begs him, please don't tell her husband what you've uncovered. The collector doesn't get rattled by her plea about cooking at all. It's the raw terror in her voice that hits him hard, and he demands to know why she's fighting so fiercely to keep her secret other talent hidden. Her top-tier cosmetic skill. He jolts to the truth her cosmetic skill is way stronger than her horrendous taste, because at that level it's not just makeup anymore, it's a full-body transformation, letting her redo her entire face. Using his clairvoyance, he presses deeper and demands, tell me about that burn mark on your face. Life Airy jolts hard, like he just struck a nerve, shaking in shock that he could see something like that too. Her composure finally shatters. She can barely whisper it out, admitting in defeat that he's seeing straight through every secret she's been hiding. She kicks off her heartbreaking tale, and suddenly she's back to that brutal accident from her youth, flames chewing through her face and leaving deep, permanent burn scars she can't ever forget, the memory still raw with every ounce of pain from a childhood stolen by tragedy. The flashback rips open the truth. Back then, her scarred face stared back, brutally different from her flawless present, and when she finally admits it, the hate runs deep. She couldn't stand her own reflection, and she'd fully surrendered on ever being loved again. Then on one fateful day, a kind young man scooped up her dropped hat and handed it right back, so the young Conga stared at her, didn't flinch or recoil, and just grinned, calling her a cool lady. She was so shocked by his innocent, blunt compliment that she couldn't even breathe, because he didn't treat her scar like something ugly. He called it a battle badge, proof she was strong and totally badass, and for the first time she felt kindness like she'd never seen before. She leans in and tells the collector, "I swear, no matter what, if Kongyus knew the truth, he'd still be my friend, just like he was that day." That one quiet act of kindness snapped her out of despair, and from that moment on, she was head over heels for him. So when she wanted to stay close more than anything, she used her gift to cover the scars she was sure would push him away. Tears spilling down her face, she begs the collector one last time, don't tell Kongus about her cosmetic skill. She's terrified that even if he still thinks she's beautiful, he'll never look at her again without seeing the mask she's worn all this time. The collector stays locked in, and a memory slams back. Someone else once felt this same sting of deception. He knows that pulling off the mask for a person who's only ever lived inside the illusion will shatter them with a betrayal so deep it feels like death. He blurts out an apology for butting in as a stranger, then softens his words to lay out the brutal truth, because the longer she clings to the lie, the wider the truth versus fake gulf grows, and when her husband finally finds out, that shock and pain hit harder than ever. See, Laffery nods, and resignation hits her like a wave. She admits that even telling a stranger her secret has finally loosened the crushing guilt she's been carrying for ages. Right then, bam, the door behind them gets slammed open, and Konga's standing in the doorway with a grim, stone-faced stare as he growls, "I heard everything." Brutal wave of shock hits, silencing Calipari and the collector, as their most private, heartfelt confession gets overheard by the one person who absolutely must never know. Laffery's face turns chalk-white, her eyes bulging with pure terror as her beloved husband closes in, because the secret she fought to hide for years is about to be ripped open in the worst way. Kong strides straight up to her, voice low and unshakable, warning her not to underestimate him. Then he admits the one thing he can't stand, the very thing he hates most, is watching her suffer. He yanks her into a crushing, wraparound hug, pins her tight against his chest, and tells her the real reason he's obsessed: her grit, her soul, her unwavering heart. Tears of pure shock and hard-won relief pour down Salafari's face as she clings to him, and his warm embrace finally melts away the years of fear and insecurity. He leans in and promises her, "I'll love every piece of you, your mark, your awful cooking, everything." Then he makes it crystal clear. He loves her for who she is, not for the face she shows the world. From the doorway, Sumer stands there with the collector, while Leondold grins as the two share an emotional reunion. Kongus has just proven he's a man of incredible character. While Kongus holds his crying wife close, he finally gets it. This might be what real love is, loving someone fully, flaws and all. Leondold wisely tells them to back off and give the couple breathing room, then pushes them to tackle the practical stuff another day, cutting the scene loose as time starts marching forward. Later, in a hush of a cozy cafe, the collector leans in and demands a cooking update from Sumir, while they both dig into a slice of cake. He takes a slow, thoughtful bite, and that sweet dessert hits like a breath of calm against the party's total chaos. Samira grins and says it all played out exactly like he predicted, while a spooky, spectral bento box looms behind her, a hilarious ghost of the disaster they just barely dodged. The collector broke everything down for Leondold. See, Lifeyear's top-tier cosmetic skill was wrecking her other powers, and now her cooking turned into a full-blown disaster. After it's all said and done, Kongyus is living the good life. His wife clings even closer now, and he gladly shells out the collector's fee, begging him to keep her cosmetic skill because he wants her to feel gorgeous, while also pleading, "Don't take away that nasty tastelessness skill." Samir lets out a laugh, soaking up the whole moment as weirdly romantic, because she's about to reclaim that tastelessness skill for him. The collector slips the fee into his pocket, flashes a wry grin, and confirms he'll go snatch the skill back right away. Sumiri teases him for not getting a girl's heart, but her smile is real as she admits it's sweet to be loved that completely. And once his business is done, the collector snaps back into motion, ready to grab the troublesome skill. He lands on a compromise, betting it'll be safest to keep her cosmetic skill locked at level 1, so she can still boost her confidence without turning it into a full-on mask or messing with her other abilities. He's convinced this is the best road for her. If her skill stays lower, she'll grind through her insecurities day by day, and maybe by the time a year passes, she'll wipe them out for good. As he strides through the sunlit streets, a deep thought hits him. Cooking and life itself both get way better when you splash in a little unexpected spice. With his pack riding tight on his shoulders, he keeps moving, hungry for the next client, the next wild story. And it's those messy, complicated human problems that keep his life as a skill collector endlessly fascinating. An ancient book snaps open, spilling out the world's core laws, and reveals the wild truth. Skills aren't just what humans learn, they're sacred divine blessings poured out by the gods, a secret so rare it can completely flip how every creature in this world is understood. This clue blows the lid off the idea that skills are just human stuff, because even the scariest monsters have their own brutal abilities, like Skill Eater and Mind Link, shown in a draconic beast and a creepy one-eyed plant freak, and it's catnip for any skill collector who lives for this kind of terrifying magic. Your report sits open in front of him, and a deep furrow pinches his brow as the new info sinks in. Then he realizes monsters can't speak, so direct negotiation has always been a dead end, a wall between humanity and the savage things out there. And just as he's thinking, he looks up because a fresh scent hits the wind and grabs his attention. Sea air bites his lungs as he stares at the coastline and spots a tiny fishing village hugging the shore, looking like the perfect place to start his odd little hustle. New town, new customers. He tightens the straps on his massive pack and strides across the warm sand toward those rustic buildings. With a big, friendly grin, he starts calling out to the villagers as they pass, pitching his wild plan on the spot. Come on over, don't be shy, and making it crystal clear he's hunting for any unwanted skills you've got. His weird proclamation snaps the whole town's attention in seconds, and right away a man steps up with guarded curiosity in his eyes. Yoru locks onto him, fully ready to listen, hungry to find out what kind of skills this remote village is hiding. After raking in a clean run of transactions that morning, Yuri clenched the coins in his hand and grinned like he'd just won big. Turns out the village was way louder and busier than he expected, a goldmine for business, and since he's done for now, he decides it's the perfect moment to hunt down lunch. While he wandered the beach hunting for something to eat, a weird sight snapped his attention. Right at the village edge stood a towering, modern-looking tower, totally out of place beside the fishing huts weathered by years, and he couldn't stop himself from asking, what on earth is that doing here? He finally spots a tiny eatery, just a shaky wooden shack teetering on a cliff, staring straight down at the endless blue sea, and the waitress slides over a perfectly made feast. A whole grilled fish, plus a vibrant bowl of fruit salad, like she crafted the perfect lunch for a day that's begging for sunshine. The moment he takes his first bite, pure deliciousness hits, and he's blown away by how amazing the meal tastes, and that view from his table is unreal. He praises the waitress, then leans in and tells her he's got a question he needs to ask about the village. Curiosity takes over, and he points at the strange building he spotted earlier, grilling the waitress about that odd tower sitting on the village's edge, his eyes glued to it as his mind spins with unanswered questions. The waitress shrugs and tells Yoru the tower is just a house, then casually reveals it belongs to a local weirdo named Therapy, leaving Yoru stunned by how blunt and dismissive she's being about the place's owner. She keeps going, and now she's telling you this wild thing, that the woman who lives there swears she can talk to monsters. The waitress clearly thinks it's nonsense, but she admits the local kids are obsessed with her, and even nudges Yoru to check it out himself if he's so curious. This news hits Yoru like a lightning strike, because if he can talk to monsters, the possibilities explode wide open, and more than anything, it could be the exact lifeline he needs in his frantic hunt for his sister. So yeah, going to that freak is an absolute must. He swallows his doubts, storms out of the tiny restaurant, and strides along the coast with his eyes glued to that weird tower, standing alone on the beach like a silent, lone monument against the blazing sky. Standing in front of that giant, weirdly shaped structure, he can't shake the feeling that something about its bizarre design is off, in a good way. It doesn't look like a house at all, it looks like a futuristic fortress, and that tells him one thing. This has to be where Therapy lives. He lifts his hand and knocks, thunk, thunk, while the sound ricochets off the door's cold metal like it's alive, and the whole eerie architecture screams that this isn't just a room he's walking into. It's a door to a world way beyond the ordinary. Shaken by how weird that door felt, he leans on one of his go-to skills, hands it down, activates his level 30 appraisal, and a faint hexagonal glow blooms from his palm. The appraisal hits him like a thunderclap. This door isn't just a door at all. It's packed with killer skills like silence, concealment, and even deodorization, and he finally snaps to the truth. This is a rare ancient relic, an artifact so powerful it shouldn't even exist. Ancient relics surge through his mind, proof that this world once hosted a vanished civilization, and these broken tech artifacts of a forgotten age still cling to power and knowledge no one can fully grasp anymore. Turns out most of these relics are beyond insane, built with methods nobody alive today can reproduce, and their very existence is a hush-hush truth only a handful of people know, like a hidden layer of history the rest of the world walks right past. He freezes, staring at a relic that could wreck him, but nothing answers from the inside. No voice, no signal, just silence. He knows these old artifacts love to turn unstable, and their power can bite as easily as it amazes. A piece of him screams to turn around and dodge whatever chaos is unfolding in this tower, but he hesitates. Then he flips on his presence detection skill and comes up empty. No one inside. That absence hits harder than fear, and now he doesn't know if he's walking into danger or something worse. He's torn up inside, trekking all this way on a rumor about a monster talker, only to face a silent, maybe even empty fortress. He wrestles with his next move, debating whether to bail and return later or push forward and risk everything. Right as he's about to turn away, the door glides open with a soft hiss, and a woman in glasses with hair a little out of place steps in behind him, startling him as she politely asks if she can help, and her sudden arrival slips right past his active detection skill. She yawns and tells him with a sleepy smile that his knocking yanked her out of sleep, and yeah, he's really standing at her door. The crazy part, she acts totally relaxed, like this isn't the same fortress-like home she calls hers. Yoru gets knocked off balance, stammers out an apology for waking her, yet his brain can't let go of one crazy question. How did she show up at all without him sensing a thing, even with his skill running at full power? He snaps his appraisal skill onto her, and the reading makes his head spin. Something unknown is shutting down not just her presence, but every single skill she has. She acts like nothing's wrong, blinks and apologizes for sleeping in, and her bright, cheerful vibe throws his focus right off the rails. His eyes lock onto the star-shaped necklace she's wearing, and it hits him. This is it, another ancient relic, the whole reason the interference won't stop. He introduces himself as a skill collector, then tells her he's been hearing whispers about someone in this village who can actually talk to monsters. The second he says monsters, her sleepy haze disappears, sparkling excitement ignites, and she shoots so close his breath is all she's talking inches from his face, practically begging him to tell her she's not the only one who's fascinated. She doesn't even wait for a reply. She bursts into a fast, fiery rant about her favorite monster types, then spills how she's been obsessed with beast species lately, especially the chubby kind of goblins, and leaves Yoru totally stunned by her wild excitement. Her rant keeps rolling, and she can't stop gushing about how adorable monsters become once you raise them. Then she admits, yeah, giants are probably too huge and would most likely chomp her, no questions asked. And Yoru just stands there, totally shell-shocked that she's casually talking about domesticating creatures everyone knows are built to be dangerous and hostile. She suddenly stops dead, cheeks burning red as the shock hits her. She realizes she's completely lost control. She lets out a tired sigh, because that's exactly why the villagers tag her as a weirdo, even while they somehow keep calm and still let her hang around. Blushing hard with embarrassment, she drops into a deep bow, floods him with non-stop apologies, and begs him to wipe her outburst from his mind, because the instant she flips from wild excitement to mortified regret, Yuri is left totally speechless. He locks eyes on her, stunned, not a clue what to say after that total whirlwind of a conversation, and right before he can get out even one word, his instincts go off, because a faint glow starts pulsing from her chest. With a blinding snap, her necklace unleashes a fierce beam of energy that rockets straight for his head at breakneck speed, and the air crackles as the silent, lethal strike closes in the blink of an eye. You get slammed backward, your body reacting before your brain even catches up. The moment the attack hits, your passive skills, sharp instinct, barrier, and leap all fire at once, shoving the beam aside and blasting you away from the impact zone. He slams onto the sand, dazed but totally unhurt, and the air still buzzes with leftover energy. Then it hits him. The only reason that beam didn't wreck him was the power locked inside his items. He snaps his head up, staring at the woman, expecting panic, but she's acting like nothing ever happened. So he grabs the moment and demands answers. What was that beam? She slides on a flawless act of innocence, eyes huge as she gasps. What are you talking about? I would never do that. Then she flips the whole accusation back on him, leaning in with fake worry. Are you okay? You're the one acting weird. He pushes himself up, steady and unshaken, and tells her he remembers every word of their talk. No way is he getting gaslit. They stand opposite each other across the distance, while that strange tower looms behind them like it's judging in silence. Therapy's stunned to the bone. Her perfect mask cracks the second she realizes he's alive, muttering in pure disbelief as her mind races. How could he walk away unhurt when that beam got deflected at the very last second and was supposed to hit him dead on? Just as the air turns thick with tension, a fresh presence spills out from the tower's open doorway. A sleek white humanoid golem glides onto the scene, elegant and strange as a dream, then locks its unblinking eyes on Yoru. Yoru spots the golem's advanced build the second it's revealed, instantly clocking it as some ancient relic, while therapy practically beams as she names it Illyria, then adds with a grin that it looks like the thing has zeroed in on him. He tries to hold his guard, but the whole situation is so wildly ridiculous that fear just won't stick, so he can only snap to the truth. The villagers were wrong, and this woman wasn't just a weirdo, she was something way stranger. Therapy snaps into a full-on argument with her golem, tugging the reins like, hey, you're a asterisk mini asterisk, then hammers the truth. She found it, she built it, and she forged their master-servant contract. With a bratty huff, she shoos Aliria to shut up, then sneers that the mighty golem is just useless. Yori recoils at Aliaria's brutal words, but Aliaria fires back with eerie, flawless robotic calm, explaining that the golem's broken state is just for rebooting, and it doesn't even flinch at being insulted. Aliria snaps all its focus onto Yoru, voice cold and straight, because even though he's playing the part of a merchant, he somehow has the tools to shut down its memory-erasing beam. Yuri dug in and stepped between Aliria and the therapy, guarding her with a quiet protective gesture. Then he snapped that he knows her skills are being hidden and that he's got ancient relic knowledge, basically proving he's a real skill merchant and not just some guy. Aliria emits a gentle beep as she scans him, her systems double-checking every word he's claiming. Then the golem decides he isn't lying, and Yuru finally steps up to introduce himself as a skill collector, practically buzzing with curiosity about therapy. He offers a deal, an information swap that screams he's winning, promising to keep their existence and ancient relics hidden, and demanding therapy so she can tell him everything about how her power lets her talk to monsters. Before therapy can even get a word out, Aliria grabs the offer and steals the punchline clean out from under her, right on the spot. A huge mirror-like panel flickers into existence beside the golem, and Yuru feels zero hostility from either of them as they usher him inside. Inside the tower, it's just as wild as outside, cold, sterile tech mashed together with a hacky monster hideout. In a brutal metal cage, a giant, furry beast snarls and squirms, dark eyes locked on them like it's ready to bolt. Yori stares at the caged beast, and it finally hits him. This isn't a game. He snaps his head toward therapy, one burning question bursting out. Why is she really keeping monsters here? Aliria jumps in for her, saying, to truly understand, you need to watch therapy's life on playback. And right then dozens of screens blaze to life around them, flashing images of therapy from her childhood all the way to today. Yora gets flustered and snaps that he's not here for some drama. He just wants a straight answer to his question. But therapy's horrified at the idea of her life getting aired and blurts out that they should have listened to her original poetry instead. She whips her head toward the monster behind the cage and beams like it's family, then tells Yoru, straight up, that loving monsters has been her whole life, and that every ounce of affection she poured into them forged a real bond. But then she lets it slip that, little by little, the words started making sense to her, like it was always that way. When Yura presses her about whether it's a learned skill, she grins and blows his mind. It's not skill at all, it's just hallucinations. Aliria cuts in with a steady calm, and that's when she drops the truth bomb. Therapy's self-diagnosis is real. Therapy snaps her gaze at the golem, furious that it just brushed her off, then somehow proves her hallucinations aren't hallucinations. On the screens, a montage plays of a cheerful young therapy laughing as she plays with all kinds of creatures, while a tiny Ali area stays glued to her side, and the golem narrates how her years of monster research finally paid off one day when she suddenly picked up a brand new skill out of nowhere. Aliria's special skill, hallucination, he explains that it's now linked to her deep urge to understand monsters, so it talks back through an illusion of real communication. You're still trying to wrap your head around it, until you realize her miracle was just a self-made illusion. Then therapy leans in and demands why she never told Aliria the truth, and the golem answers flat out that Aliria would have never believed it anyway. The golem admits they had to slam the door on every visitor to shield therapy and her weird little hobby, and that secrecy snowballed into a whole mess. The relic necklace, they say, was built to keep her skills from leaking to outsiders, and Aliria even jokes that it was a perfect bonus. It also looked amazing on her, like Yoru was just a pawn stuck in their bizarre game. Aliria then fires off a demand. She tells Yor to use his appraisal skill on the therapy, so the truth hits him with his own eyes, and even though she words it like a question, the golem's tone screams, "Do it," forcing Yor to comply grudgingly. An appraisal panel flickers on, showing off her skills for him to stare at: hallucination, insensitivity, charm, and even presence detection. Then he freezes, stunned beyond belief, because that impossible hallucination ability is absolutely, terrifyingly real. He lets out a brutal sigh and drags his hand across his forehead in defeat. The hope he had just evaporates, and all that's left is a crushing, gut-wrenching disappointment. Real communication with monsters is still nothing but a fantasy. A wild new idea sparks in his head. He swings to therapy and asks if she'll sell him her hallucination skill, promising he'll buy it if she doesn't want to part with it. That offer gets crushed instantly by an outraged growl from both therapy and her trapped monster. Later on, Yoru stands outside the tower again, talking to Alaria as the day burns out, and the setting sun stretches razor-long shadows across the sand. Aliaraya fires a question at him. What on earth is a merchant doing talking to monsters? Yura grips the locket on his neck, his face hardening as he snaps that it's all part of growing his business, but mostly, he's hunting for someone. The golem's optical sensor locked onto the locket, flagged it as a portrait, and declared his motive sentimental, and Yura snapped back, demanding it stop scanning his personal stuff. Alaria's eyes snap from the locket to the far-off village, and the moment hits like thunder. She declares it's the golem that's seen the woman from the portrait just the other day. Yuri's eyes bulge with pure shock, his heart hammering as he blurts for confirmation. Then Alaria nods and says she spotted her in a tiny village south of where they are, during a monster field survey with therapy. The golem keeps talking, and it explains why that woman stood out like a spark in the dark. She's offering free appraisals to anyone who needs them, whether it's the local villagers or travelers just passing through. A storm of emotions rages across Yuri's face as his hand clamps down on his shirt, because deep inside, he already knows what they called her, the title the people she saved gave her. Illyria finally confirms what he's been holding back. These folks aren't just talking about a woman, they call her the saint, the benevolent one, and then it hits you. Flashback storms your mind of his blonde-haired sister, her gentle smile glowing while grateful people ring around her. The wagon driver waves him off, calling out for a safe trip as the carriage rumbles away, and suddenly he's alone on a dusty road. With one last look over his shoulder, he marches toward the horizon, an endless, uncertain road leading straight to the distant coastline. He bursts into a frantic sprint, that huge backpack thumping and bouncing with every desperate stride, and no matter how hard he drives himself forward, his heart keeps pounding like it's trapped in panic, his mind whirling with pure anxiety and blistering anticipation. Cresting the hill, he finally spots a tiny hidden village tucked in the valley, and when his fingers clamp around the small object, his nerves shake as he breathes out the one word he's been hunting for years, Saint. A wave of grim relief hit his face, and you could see it, exhaustion tearing at him but resolve holding steady. After all this time, all that pain, all that searching, he finally thinks he's found his sister. His mind snaps back to the worst night of his life, the night his hometown got ripped apart in a brutal massacre, and even after all these years, the screams, the flames, and the death are still seared into his memory. That tiny whisper, said to be a saint's clue, was the first real lead he'd clawed out in forever, and it lit up his hope with his friends in a distant land. He had to chase it, no matter what it cost. He glares down at the calm little town, and dread twists tight in his stomach. Sure, it might be some gorgeous trap meant to reel him in, but he has no choice at all. He's stepping in. He heads to a local farmer and asks about the saint, only for the man to shake his head and say she's not in this village, but she's past the nearby forest. Then the old farmer leans in, voice hard and warning-laden, telling him not to go just out of curiosity. The villagers say the saint's become famous for handing out free appraisals to anyone who finds her, kind on the surface, but a nasty rumor shadows her name, because a few locals have vanished without a trace lately. Hearing about missing people yanks him straight back to the gut-punch memory of his sister's real power, how she'd disguise her appraisal as something harmless, then use it to steal abilities from anyone she decided was worthless. He flashes the villagers a confident grin, thanks them for the warning, then swears he has to see the saint with his own eyes. The crowd erupts, screaming that the forest is crawling with monsters, but his decision is locked in. As he sprints through the thick woods, a monster with a flower for a face bursts from the trees and blasts him with a deafening roar, while his thoughts spiral in silent agony. How could his sister, who had everything, ever feel the need to steal skills from other people? With a snap of his hand, he blasts out a ruthless torrent of wind magic, and his power more than holds its ground against the forest's threats. Yet that unanswered question still gnaws at him, a burning mystery that keeps pushing him deeper. The monster drops in an instant, dark blood splashes across the ground in his clothes, but he doesn't slow down for a second. He barrels forward, steamrolling past the dead, roaring beast, eyes locked on the road ahead. Leaving the beast's dissolving corpse crumpled in his wake, he surged forward, doubling his pace, while his own heartbeat echoed his promise. He couldn't burn even a second, because where he was headed mattered too much. His mind snaps to his sister's brutal skill, plunder. It's legendary, infamous, and so rare it only lets one person hold it at a time, and every single past user, a true villain carved into history. She can't stop replaying the old legends, the merciless king who ripped everything away just to grab the throne, and the corrupted hero who turned on his own comrades and schemed to end the world. The power wasn't a gift. It was a curse, and anyone who touched it was doomed to fall. A harsher, more painful memory crashes back, him and his sister wrapped up in that sweet, innocent moment. and it haunts him like a curse. If only the last person who grabbed the plunder had lived longer, his sister might have escaped this nightmare fate. He slams the idea out of his head, calling it a useless fantasy, because what's done is done. Now he just wants answers for the present, why his sister feels she has to plunder. He pushes deeper along the twisting forest path, face carved with exhaustion and stubborn determination, and even though the road has been brutal, he can finally sense he's right about to reach the end. Just as he breaks through the tree line, he steps out and stares down at the village he was promised, silent, cut off from the world, and exactly where the saint is supposed to live. Without a second to spare, he launches into a sprint down the grassy slope, barreling toward town. No more caution, no more gathering answers, just whatever fate is waiting for him next. He freezes for a quick second to catch his breath, wipes the sweat off his brow with the back of his hand, and that small cut on his cheek, the forest fight souvenir, hits him like a warning. Danger's already been there, and he's survived it. As he stares at the still houses, that cozy countryside vibe hits him like a punch, so much like the hometown he lost it hurts. So he slams the memory aside and tells himself the only mission that matters right now is finding the saint. He knows one wrong move, blabbing his real identity, could blow everything up if this is some kind of trap, so he plays it smart. He slips into a cover persona, then quietly corners the locals to find out what they know. He clutches his resolve and steps up to the village gates in disguise, swapping his old self for a brand new persona, telling himself, for now, he's not the collector of stolen skills, just a normal traveling merchant. Two guards at the gate stared in shock at the sight of a merchant out in the middle of nowhere, and he smoothed everything over with a warm smile, saying he was only there to chase fresh business opportunities. Then he flashes a fake grin of just because I'm shocked surprise and tells the guards he's heard this is Saint Sama's home too, claiming he came all this way hoping to snag one of her free appraisals. So yeah, he's got the perfect cover story for being here. The guards' eyes flare with excitement as they snap to attention, gloating that the rumors are true and that their saint is absolutely wonderful, beautiful, the whole package. He just listens in silence, calm on the outside, while chaos churns underneath. When he demanded to know where he could find her, the guards pointed him straight to a house perched on a hill at the edge of the village, then tossed out a half-muttered warning not to get any strange ideas, like they honestly believed she couldn't possibly be in danger. He flashes a grin, promises he'll take their warning to heart, and the guards keep singing his praises, saying that the saint is a genius who can wield every kind of crushing, powerful magic. As he sets up his tiny stall in the village square, the truth snaps into place about that guard's blunder, because the villagers spill everything without hesitation, convinced their saint is unstoppable, untouchable, and backed by ironclad faith. The locals go on, telling him the Saint Sama hands out free appraisals every single week, and even gives tips to help people sharpen their skills, then gush that she's kind, amazing, and loved by everyone. He brings up the rumors about the missing people he'd heard, and the villagers back them up instantly. No stalling, no doubt. But even so, their faith doesn't crack. They're dead certain that as long as the saint stays with them, those missing will be found and brought home safe. He glances down at the trinkets on his stall, and a dark shadow cuts across his face as he thinks of his sister, because all these people shower her with trust, totally blind to the terrifying truth lurking beneath. After thanking the townspeople, he slams his things together and strides toward the road that leads out of the village, because when they mention the Saint Sama lives in the house on the hill, something personal and terrifying hits him like a gut punch. His thoughts slam back to his childhood, when his own parents ditched him, and the only thing that kept him standing was his sister, Nissen, always there beside him in that hill house, her presence the one shred of comfort he had. He still remembers those childhood brawls, how every time he got knocked around, he'd crawl back home, bruised and battered, to the one person who was always there, waiting for him. He stops dead in his tracks, eyes bulging as he stares at the house ahead, and a sickening thought hits him so hard he can barely whisper that this has to be some twisted joke. His fist tightens as he steps toward the front door, and just like that, the house hits him with a brutal déjà vu, identical to his childhood home. He swallows a breath, throws on his merchant voice, and announces he's here to meet the saint. No answer, so he shoulder checks the door open and slips inside like he's afraid the silence will snap, only to find the whole place hanging heavy in the air as he eases from the doorway into the main room. The room is packed with bookshelves like he remembers, except dust smothers everything, and a sudden, phantom flash hits his eyes, his sister grinning as she carries a whole stack of books. He freezes in the middle of the room, eyes snapping left and right in pure panic, because every little thing, those windows, the furniture layout, is a perfect copy of the home he lost. His eyes snap to a picture on the wall, and the last shred of his calm instantly shatters. Before he even realizes it, he's back as a little kid, helping his sister hang that exact painting right there, in that exact spot. He pushes deeper into the impossible house, voice shaking as he cries out for his sister, and a crushing dread sinks into his bones the closer he gets to the bottom of the staircase. His breath snagged in his throat as he called her name again, his voice reduced to a trembling whisper, while that wooden banister loomed in front of him like a memory that had turned into a nightmare. At the very top of the stairs, a single blonde woman stood with her back turned, her long hair spilling down in a golden curtain as the study around her glowed, books stacked everywhere, lit by this soft, otherworldly light. The camera dips to her feet, poised like a graceful dancer on the wooden floor, while the house stays deadly silent, until his ragged breathing tears through it. Slowly, she turns toward him, and that gentle smile blooms on her lips, like she's been waiting for this exact moment all along. She lays a tender hand on her heart, locks eyes with him across the distance, and in a soft, steady voice confirms every fear and hope he's been carrying. Then she welcomes home her dear brother like only she can. In the dim little study, he stood frozen in a haze of dusty old paper, staring at a woman wearing his sister's face, while towering bookshelves threw shadows that squirmed across the room like they knew his secret. Because the moment he saw the chapter title hanging in the air, dread crushed his lungs. He wasn't facing his sister, he was facing an imposter. A creepy, unsettling smile crawled across her face, and her eyes went ice cold, nothing like the warmth he'd always known. The act shattered in an instant, and the truth hit hard. This wasn't someone he loved, it was a total stranger. She was a phantom in disguise, mimicking her with a smiling mask for some dark, twisted reason. He clenched his courage and asked, voice shaking but steady, if she really was the Saint Sama the villagers kept whispering about, the legend living in this quiet town, because he needed answers, and it felt like the only thread he had left to grab. With a smug little wave, she admitted she was only pretending to be the real saint, just a thin, pale shadow of the greatness everyone else claimed. When he pushed for answers, asking if she even knew his sister, her face snapped into pure fanatical worship, and she cut him off with a grin. No was too small a word for what she felt, because her feelings didn't even live on the same level as reality. Her hands clasped at her chest, eyes blazing with a creepy, worship-locked glow, and she launched into a full-on praise rant, claiming the saint was wise, noble, and so powerful she commanded all things, like a goddess striding through mortal life. Then she confessed the wildest part. Her love was so intense she even copied the saint's exact look, proof of devotion, so total it bordered on devotion gone feral. Leaning in like she was sharing a secret, she shot him a look full of shaky pride and a desperate plea to be approved, then asked, "So, does this actually sell? Am I close enough to the woman I worship?" He edged back a step, and her wild fanaticism made his skin crawl. Sure, from far away her look was shockingly close and he could have been fooled, but he shoved that off fast, his face turning cold as he demanded to know where his real sister was. She spun away from him, her posture dripping with arrogant superiority, then sneered that his sister, his excellency, would never, ever be caught dead in some pathetic backwater village, and even claimed she wasn't even in this country at all. She sank into the chair like she owned it, her grin stretching into something downright sinister, and then, laughing with chilling joy, she dropped a bombshell. The saint had already seized control of a whole nation across the continent, and now she was actively scheming to take the entire world. The word hit him like a punch to the gut, his eyes flying wide with total disbelief, and his brain scrambling to square the sweet image of his sister with the cold, power-hungry tyrant staring back from that portrait. The impostor drank in his stunned silence and kept going, smug as ever, saying his sister was so buried in her grand plans she wasn't about to spare him a second thought. Then he could only stammer, trying to scrape together a real question while this insane truth crushed all his words. His whole world felt like it was wobbling off its axis as he tried to make sense of everything, because while he'd been grinding, training his skills as a skill collector, he never once saw his sister's so-called shift into a would-be world conqueror, and now he couldn't stop himself from screaming, why would she choose a path this dark? She stared down at him with pity and pure contempt, stunned that the saint's own younger brother was still too clueless to see what his sister really was and what she really planned to do. She snapped that even as just an admirer, she understood the saint better than he ever would, blood or not, then leaned in close, let venom-sweet words drip out, and sealed it with one brutal truth. He was nothing special to his sister at all. But nothing could snap his resolve. He planted his feet, stared past her with unshakable eyes at those silent, watching bookshelves, and swore that the fact he didn't understand her was exactly why he wouldn't quit. He'd keep digging for clues about what happened to her. His eyes narrowed with iron resolve. This wasn't some random stranger's act or borrowed admiration, because he was doing it as her family, bound by something deeper than worship. His words lit a flash of fury in her eyes, and that bright, fake smile instantly crumbled to reveal pure rage underneath, like lightning charging between her fingertips. She hissed at him for his arrogance, unable to wrap her head around the fact that he truly thought he was the only one special to the saint. The air turned thick with danger, that one ugly word slamming into her thoughts, and then the story cut to the outside of that cozy little house, waiting, silent, for the violence about to erupt inside. Without a single warning, a monster lightning bolt ripped through the roof and blasted the exact spot he'd been standing a moment ago. Floorboards exploded into splinters, and the shockwave hurled him backward so hard a raw scream tore out of his throat. He hit the ground in a crumpled heap outside, every muscle screaming, while he stared at the smoking hole in the house, because that blast had been lightning fast and final, and it left zero doubt in his mind she'd come to end him. Back in the wrecked room, the imposter stared in shock. He'd actually lived through her first brutal hit. He scanned himself and saw the truth. His saved skills kicked in automatically. Instinct, a barrier, and a jump, bam, just like that, pulled him out of the deadly magic's path at the absolute last second. He remembered what the villagers warned him about Saint Sama, magic after magic, spell after spell, and now the imposter was finally confirming it for real. She leaned in with a creepy calm and delivered a message straight from the saint herself. She could handle any nuisance however she wanted, her hand flicking like she was already lining up the next devastating spell. Her voice sank into a killer whisper as she promised to wipe him out for her excellency. Then water churned into a spinning vortex around her, and he braced himself for the next magical strike. Water tore through the air, then he snapped up a level 30 barrier on the spot, blocking it cold, and shouted through the magic shield that he just wanted answers about his sister. That brutal water spell slammed into his shimmering barrier, proving just how terrifyingly strong she was. She wasn't testing him at all, she was aiming to wipe him out. When she brushed off his skills like they were nothing and ordered him to die, he knew it wasn't a battle anymore. It was an execution. A cruel smile curled on her lips as she watched him squirm, savoring every ounce of control she had over him. Then she taunted, asking how he could possibly survive her next strike, right as the water started to twist and reshape itself. The flood slammed straight through his barrier, wrapping him in a suffocating watery tomb where every breath felt stolen. Then a horrifying thought hit him. Could she have the plunder skill too, the way his sister did, stealing abilities from whoever stood in her way? But he shut that thought down fast, gripping onto the one truth he could never shake. The plunder skill was a one-of-a-kind rarity. Only one person could exist with it in any era. And as long as his sister was still alive, this imposter couldn't possibly have the same power. Water slammed into him, burning his lungs for air, and panic tore through his mind as he hunted for a way out. Yet he felt totally powerless, unable to pinpoint the source of her power because he had no way to study her skills. He desperately tried to trigger his appraisal skill, but a brutal force slammed it shut, blocking it cold. Then his eyes snapped to her neck, where a star-shaped relic necklace shimmered, the same kind his sister's therapist used to wear, and he instantly knew. That's what was interfering. The second he saw that necklace was the key. He blasted wind magic with everything he had, snapping open a chance where none existed. Gale force winds shoved the suffocating water back just long enough for him to gulp air and lock in his next move. She blinked, genuinely impressed that he'd shoved back her attack, but he didn't have time to celebrate. His only shot was to dash and close and snatch that necklace, even though fighting a long-range mage was a nightmare. Her eyes flared with that same wild, fanatical gleam as she blurted out her fantasies, dreaming of the reward she could win, and she was sure that hauling his dead body before her excellency would earn her even more praise than she could possibly imagine. Hearing that, his resolve turned to steel. He knew it was a lethal gamble, but he had no other path, so he lunged at her, and the floorboards exploded with thick thorny vines to slam him back. Vines wrapped his body like vicious serpents, thorns biting in and ripping his clothes as the imposter smirked, declaring he was done for and that she'd end him right now. And this was the moment he'd been craving. He yanked a silver locket from his pocket, snapped it open, and there it was, a treasured photo of him and his sister as kids. The instant the imposter saw it, her freeze hit like a wall, her focus cracked, and her attack stalled mid-swing. Then he roared and flipped his blink skill the instant she hesitated. Everything smeared into blur as he vanished from her view, grabbing the exact opening he'd carved. In less than a heartbeat, he vanished and snapped right behind her, arm outstretched to seize the source of her power. Her eyes bulged with panic as she clocked her mistake, and he delivered a chilling line. Now he could finally see what she could do. A ghostly panel snapped into his vision, spilling her real power, mimicry plunder at level 20, except it wasn't the genuine skill, just a copy, and underneath it sat a brutal list of every spell she'd stolen and imitated from the villagers. With a lightning snatch, he ripped the protective necklace off her neck, and finally, his appraisal skill pierced her defenses. When he confirmed his theory about her mimicry, she exploded into an outraged shriek, demanding he hand back the precious gift she'd gotten from her excellency. She snapped forward in a blind rush, desperate to snatch the necklace back, composure gone, panic blazing in her eyes. He dodged her clumsy swing with ease, yanked her in, then used his super strength and binding skills to slam her to the floor, pinning her there as he coldly snapped that her blind panic let her guard down completely. He dangled the locket right in front of her eyes, proving he knew her inside out. Then he dropped the truth. Her mimicry could copy only one legendary skill at a time. And just when she thought it was over, he offered her the most shocking deal of all, his own plunder skill. His insight slammed into her so hard she went speechless, and he kept talking, obsessing over plunder ever since he and his sister split, even guessing that resistance-type skills could shut it down, because he was dying to test that theory. Finally, she snapped, yelled at him to shut up, her face twisted with brutal frustration, and then she hit him with the truth. It didn't matter, because her skill was only an imitation, and it always would be. A brutal memory slammed into her, young, lonely, and staring at the sky, because she'd copied lightning magic just to feel cool, dreaming with every breath to become a powerful mage like the other kids. But every time she tried to blend in, they crushed her. Other kids piled on her in packs, sneering that she was a dirty copycat, and shutting her out for that weird, unique power of hers. They hurled stones at her and screamed insults until every word rang inside her head: garbage, scum, and the bullying never stopped, torments raining down on her just for the skill she was born with. Crushed into the dirt, tears pouring down her cheeks, she screamed into a world that felt utterly unfair, begging for the right to pick her own skills, cursing the brutal fate that locked her into mimicry the moment she was born. Just then a gentle hand settled on her head. She snapped her eyes up and saw the saint standing there, telling her not to shrink from her worth, not when her skill wasn't worthless at all. With a kindness that felt like a turning point, the saint urged her to copy her own plunder skill, promising she'd always stand beside her. The memory crumbled away, yanking him back into the moment. Then he clenched his grip and snarled his demand through low, urgent breaths, pushing her to tell him where his sister was, because he wanted her to remember just how much power and skill he had in his arsenal. But her soul, shaped by loneliness and sharpened by fanaticism, wouldn't bend for anyone. She shot him a glare full of pure defiance, daring him to know he had no chance, and reminding him the outcome was never his to choose. He snapped back that they wouldn't know the outcome until the final seconds. Then, right as the words left his mouth, his intuition's skill blared a warning. An overwhelming danger was about to slam down. A terrifying dark energy tore out of her in a violent, totally out-of-control blast. The whole house got wiped out in an instant, walls ripped open, and the entire structure shattered in a brutal, world-breaking blast of pure power. He got hurled through the sky like a rag doll, spinning through a vicious hurricane of splintered wood and smashed stone with zero way to fight back. She stood right at the blast's epicenter, her body being devoured by the same brutal power she'd unleashed in that last desperate swing. He slammed into the ground, bruised and bleeding, but his tough, barrier-style defense had saved him again, so he forced himself up, groaning through the pain as he stared at the total wreckage around him. He staggered up to his feet, staring in disbelief at the smoldering crater where the building used to be, and he just couldn't wrap his head around the sheer destructive power she'd unleashed. Rushing through the wreckage, he spotted her lifeless body, and it was unmistakable. She detonated a high-level self-destruct spell, throwing away her own life to drag him down with her. He gripped the star-shaped necklace like it might snap his fear in half, because the truth hit hard. This wasn't sweet admiration, it was full-blown fanaticism, and it terrified him to realize his sister had someone fiercely, dangerously loyal standing right beside her while she plotted to conquer the world. From the tree line guarding the village's edge, a lone cloaked figure stood motionless, eyes locked on the townsfolk as they sprinted toward the roaring plume of smoke and shattered debris. The true saint watched, cold and unmoved, as she noted the woman was dead, then admitted her follower had been strong, called the loss a tragedy, and made it clear this death was exactly what she wanted all along. Her final thought was razor clear. Her fanatical servant had finally fulfilled her greatest dream, dying for her master. Satisfied with the chaos she'd set loose, the saint spun on her heel, left everything behind, and slipped into the woods in total silence. A young man sits alone in a hushed tavern, chewing his meal while replaying his latest run-ins in his head, and then, bam, a title card hangs there like a warning sign, telling you this pause is all about how testing skills can turn dangerous and unpredictable in a heartbeat. He quietly stares at the wild abilities of the sister he just met, then her image flickers in his mind, and he's hit with the shock of it all. Her charm, allure, and seduction are all level 7, paired with a creepy level 5 lack of sensitivity. He keeps staring at how weird the world really is, realizing reality outtwists any story he's ever read, yet all those skill paths he knew, from psychological tricks to full-on magic, never once included anything like the nuns, so a hot spark of curiosity ignites in him, and he can't resist running a tiny test of his own. A steely resolve hardens his expression as he vows to copy her whole skill set, straight up. Then his mind spins. What happens if he turns on charm, allure, seduction, and that ruthless insensitivity all at once? The possibilities are a locked door, but his curiosity barrels right through it. After locking in his decision, he shoots a glance at his reflection. Still nothing changes on the surface, and with that eerie certainty, he calls over the nearest waitress to pay his bill. As he straightens up and leans toward the waitress to talk, his activated skills kick in like lightning. He barely asks for the bill and his backpack, yet his voice and movements now carry this unreal, irresistible pull that snaps her attention instantly. The waitress freezes on the spot, cheeks burning bright red as her words tumble out in stutters, her polished act cracking instantly under his overwhelming presence. Then she blurts that she'll bring the bill right away. He flashes her a soft, harmless smile and thanks her for the meal, totally oblivious to the disaster he's sparking, while the waitress just freezes, eyes spiraling as his aura drags her into a trance she can't even explain. Her thoughts sprint in panic as she scrambles to explain her own reaction, and when did Collector-san start showing up in a shirt so undone it's basically daring her to stare? Then she catches a sharp whiff of men's cologne rolling off him, and her love-struck brain snaps it into place, like that scent is the only reason she feels this intense pull. Just as he spun to leave, the waitress blurted his name like it was the last lifeline, voice shaking as she begged him to return soon. Behind her, a status window flashed his active skills. Charm, allure, seduction, and insensitivity, each one blazing at level 7. The moment he steps away, icy dread slams into the young man. He realizes his mistake too late, hands flying to his head as panic takes over, because he remembers with horror that his insensitivity skills were turned on the whole time. Behind him in the tavern, the waitress staggers in confusion, scrambling to figure out why she acted so strangely. Now that intelligence was in Michael's skilled hands, he decided to keep running his own work while he waited for news to roll in, because sure, he could eavesdrop and sniff out details, but without real-world experience, he knew he couldn't pull it off like the pros. He decided this was the moment to level up fast, then slipped into a quiet alley to test his level 30 eavesdropping skill, pressed hard against the wall, trying to catch a passing couple's conversation, even as his wildly suspicious posture practically screamed, "I'm listening." Right away, he got caught red-handed, then a voice from behind snapped, "So what are you doing here?" Panicking, he spun around with a jittery grin and tried to play dumb, asking if he looked suspicious, like they couldn't already tell. The one who found him was an old priest with a kind face, and he just met his eyes with a calm, gentle smile. Then he told the young man that the Lord watches even the smallest deeds, soft words, but they hit hard. Caught red-handed, the protagonist just scratched the back of his head in pure embarrassment, shot a quick apology, and promised the priest he'd take his words to heart, then hurried out before the awkward moment crushed him. As he strode off, he caught two young boys whispering that some adult had just gotten hauled up and scolded by a priest. His eyes narrowed as he glanced back, and there it was. The old man was definitely clergy. He suddenly found himself right in front of the man's workplace, a plain little church crowned with a big, simple cross, and at the foot of the steps, the priest waited, smiling like he'd been expecting him all along. A shadow sliced across his face as he stared at the church, and a wave of brutal memories crashed over him. There was nothing kind about that place, because it was the same institution that stamped him as worthless back in his youth, and that one moment still hurt like a brand. The priest, clueless about the chaos rolling inside him, welcomed him in and said the church was a safe place for everyone, while the young man fought a weird, fake smile and politely refused to step inside. Undeterred, the priest offered to get his skills appraised right there in the church, something they did all the time, but he snapped it down again, saying he still had work to do collecting skills and couldn't stay put. The instant he brought up collecting skills, the priest's friendly smile crumbled into cold, hard judgment, and his voice turned icy as he snapped that, to someone who serves God, trading skills is straight-up blasphemy. Sensing trouble in the air, the protagonist bolted before he could get scolded a second time. Then just as he spun to leave, the priest snapped, "Wait," and the urgency in his voice hit like thunder. Right as the sermon was about to start, he tried to slip out politely, claiming he had another engagement, but the priest snapped back fast. This wasn't about any duty at all. It was a personal issue of huge importance. With a shady look, the priest leaned in and whispered, asking the protagonist to meet him in private, so even though he hesitated, he still ended up nodding and agreeing. He got marched off the street and shoved into the priest's private living quarters, this little plain room tucked behind the main church, then stepped in and took in the Spartan, spotless emptiness. The priest bowed his head and apologized for bothering him so late, face all grim and heavy, and before the words even finished fading, he cut straight to it, asking the young man what kind of trouble a skill collector had showing up with him. Bafflement hit the protagonist like a punch. Why would a hard, devout priest even track down someone like him? He fumbled for words, trying to land the right question about what this secret meeting was really about. Sensing his confusion, the priest didn't waste a second. He leaned in and straight up asked if the skill collector also handled skills people would call unworthy. Unworthy before God was a brand new phrase to him, but the meaning hit instantly, and he admitted it was true. Then the priest leaned in and made one simple, heavy request. Right now, prove it, use your appraisal skill on me. The appraisal results started flooding his vision, flashing the priest's skills one by one, then one line blazed the brightest: libido, level 20. That full list paints this messy, real kind of man, good at boring stuff like appraisal and psychology, yet blessed or cursed with an absurdly high libido. Meanwhile, the priest sits stone still, hands locked on the book in his lap, waiting for the verdict he knows is about to smash down. His eyes blew wide with disbelief, his mind spinning as the truth hit. Yeah, this so-called man of God wasn't free at all. He was crushed under some massive, worldly craving. He tore through the data in a flash. Sure, the libido skill was common, but level 20. That was basically mythical, the kind of number you almost never see, and when it hits that hard, it usually drags people into crime. Still, this priest somehow kept his life from unraveling, proving his willpower was ironclad. The priest's calm snapped like a glass wall. He burst into cries of agony, calling himself a disgrace for a man of the cloth, as if this indecency had stained his soul. The protagonist just lifted a finger and shushed him, saying he'd heard plenty of requests like this before, and warned him to keep his voice down if he wanted the secret to stay buried. The confession that came next blew everyone's mind, because the priest admitted his affliction was so intense that even plain desk legs could look obscene to him, and he was terrified he'd snap and hurt the believers. The protagonist stayed calm on the outside, but inside, the whole thing sickened him. After a quick think, he admitted that buying a skill at that level would burn through his whole budget right now, so he asked to come back another day, and the priest gratefully agreed. Relief hit the old man like a tidal wave. He sagged into his chair, sure the pain was almost over, and then he spilled the truth. His libido only started roaring after she showed up at the church. The moment he heard talk about a woman, curiosity snapped into full gear, and right then, a soft voice drifted from the hallway as a woman asked his father if everything was okay, drawn in by their loud arguing. A nun burst into the doorway, cheeks flushed like she'd sprinted there, and the priest instantly panicked, then blurted out a quick lie about chatting with a merchant to get fresh equipment for the church. The nun bought his excuse with a knowing grin, then tapped a finger to her lips like she was keeping a secret, and somehow it felt way too tempting for someone in her role. Her eyes sparkled with a wild, unreadable shine as she darted her gaze between the two men. She suddenly yelped and pitched forward, tripping over her own feet and slamming into the ground in a wild fall. Then her dark habit flared up as she tumbled, leaving the protagonist with a clear view that stunned him to the bone. The priest shot to her side at once, worry blazing in his eyes as he demanded to know if she was hurt. Then she just apologized for the disruption, insisting she'd tripped and needed help getting back up. His suspicion snapped into certainty, and he fired up his appraisal skill, sure this fall was no accident, and what he saw hit like a thunderclap. Charm 7, Lure 7, and Erosa level 7, stacked together like a wild, dangerous combo. But the last skill on the list was the biggest mind-bender of them all. At sensitivity level 5, the protagonist just stared, totally lost, because the skills clashed so hard he couldn't make heads or tails of it. The nun sprawled on the floor suddenly snapped into clarity, realizing how wild that skill combo was, like even a succubus wouldn't be this blunt, and that hit home. She truly knew, at least a little, just how dangerous the power in her hands was. The priest and the protagonist were nailed to the spot, cheeks burning with shock and embarrassment, and then, just like that, the nun brushed it off and walked away, leaving them frozen in stunned silence. The moment it clicked, the protagonist spun toward the priest and blurted out, "So you're the one he warned me about." The priest nodded and said her arrival, and her terrifying hidden power, were exactly what sent his urges crashing out of control. He broke down her heartbreaking story. Before she ever stumbled into the church, men had been hounding her nonstop, and the church offered her safety at last, but her arrival sparked a brand new disaster, and even the nun in charge seemed totally clueless. The priest slammed his fist on the table, frustration exploding as he finally found the real problem. Her insensitivity skill was so strong it let her ignore the intense, arousing pull she had on everyone else. He had a theory. Her parents must have deliberately buried her other abilities from her. It was the kind of lie the church's own appraisal system was built to never expose. Right then, the nun stuck her head back in and blurted that she'd forgotten something huge. She'd been training hard the whole time to become a real, proper sister. Her smile from before snapped into pure terror when she kept talking. She wanted to test a brand new skill she swore she'd learned, and the very first person she planned to appraise was herself. She was practically bouncing with excitement, convinced appraisal had just been added to what she'd always thought was her only talent, cold, brutal insensitivity, while the two men just stared, faces drained of color as terror gripped them over what was about to go horribly wrong. With a bright good night, she slipped away and left them spiraling into panic, while the priest muttered that this was the absolute worst outcome. If she found out the truth about her own powers, the fallout would be catastrophic. An entire week slid by, and the city kept hustling like nothing was wrong beneath a calm, quiet sky. The protagonist marched back to the church clutching his cash, ready to seal the deal for the priest's libido skill, only to have the priest wrench open the door, looking devastated, and snap that this wasn't the moment. The old man's face crumpled with despair as he wailed the sister's name, voice breaking on every word. Then he slammed the truth into the room. She was gone. The church grounds erupted in chaos as a search party got scrambled together, and the priest snapped that she'd been missing since that very morning, vanished without a trace. On her spotless bed, one single letter waited like a knife, an agonizing confession where she branded herself a disgrace to her faith and begged to be punished for her tainted nature. The protagonist snapped it all together. She'd appraised herself and uncovered the truth, and he immediately shelved his business, telling the priest that tracking down the devout believer had to be their #1 mission right now. Without wasting a second, he fired up his own skills, mixing his level 30 presence sense with his sharp smell to hunt down her trail. He shut his eyes, shoved every sense he had into the chase, and pushed himself to find her before time ran out. His search finally spat him out at the edge of a dark, nasty forest on the city's outskirts, and he realized with a sick drop in his stomach that nobody stumbles into a place like that unless they're being led. He snapped around to the priest, urgency blasting out of his voice, demanding they move now, because if they didn't track her down fast, he was sure something awful would strike. Lost in the crushing shadow of the trees, the sister clung to a thick, rough rope under a heavy branch, murmuring a prayer for forgiveness while her heart shattered as she readied herself to end it all. Suddenly, the protagonist's presence detection snapped to life and pinned her exact location. Then he blurted, "I found you," as the priest's voice cracked open her name, his shout shaking with pure terror and desperation. They burst into the clearing just in time to watch her cinch a crude noose around her own neck, pale, tear-streaked, eyes hollow, like she'd already given up on fighting her fate. Without even blinking, the protagonist snapped out wind magic, one sharp slash, and the rope gave way. The sister staggered, and the priest rushed in just in time, grabbing her in a frantic, desperate hold. She fought his grip with all she had, sobbing that she never dreamed she carried such filthy, unholy power. Then she begged him to release her, pleading to finish her last, terrible act of penance. In a panic, she clawed at the very thing she kept repeating, ripping the fabric as she gasped in agony, screaming that she couldn't live another moment, and that she wasn't worthy to stand before God. He clutched her tight and spoke straight through her despair, staring her down and saying, "If you're not worthy, then neither am I." Then the protagonist slammed in with a savage interruption. She pointed at the torn clothes and said her state was straight up indecent, and the sister's hysterical meltdown instantly cracked. The priest pounced on the moment, pushing the sister to use her fresh ability and judge him, demanding she finally face the truth. She wasn't the only one crushed by what she thought were tainted powers. Tears shimmered in her eyes as she locked onto him, and her appraisal skill kicked in, while the priest stared right back, unblinking, ready to spill the one secret that could ruin him. He spoke the truth, calm, clear, and impossible to ignore, so she could finally see it and hear it, and then he admitted his own libido skill was only at level 20. Then he leaned in and asked if it scared her to be touched by someone as dangerous as him, and as he talked, she clocked the real bombshell. The priest's reason skill was capped at level 20, the one thing holding back his massive, creeping desire. One tear slipped down the priest's face as he apologized, admitting he'd terrified her, and that he was just as flawed, just as tainted as any human. Then he jerked his gaze away, crushed by the shame of what he'd confessed. He laid out his original game plan, trying to crush his own craving with sheer willpower, then counting on the merchant to wipe the skill clean, but seeing his sister fall apart broke him, and he made a brand new vow right then. With a voice blazing with fresh conviction, he declared that every skill is a gift from God, even the ones that look stained, and that these trials are meant to be faced head-on and crushed, because God has placed this test right in front of them. He reached for her hand, voice gentle, eyes iron, and asked her to stand through this trial with him, not for a cure, but for the strength of walking side by side through the hardest road ahead. Hope flared back in her sister's eyes as she choked up and took his hand, admitting she'd been wrong. Then she nodded, ready to walk this road with him side by side. In that moment, the scene turned into something holy, two saints chasing redemption, while angels filled the air like a choir, and they swore to keep moving forward as servants of God, their faith blazing brighter because they finally bared their vulnerability to each other. From the sidelines, the protagonist just stared and muttered in his head like, yeah, this totally looks like it belongs in a sacred text, even as the back of the priest's robes was drenched in huge sweat stains. He slammed a hand to his face as the truth hit him hard, because the priest chose to overpower the deal with his own skills instead of selling, and the negotiation blew up completely. Just as he spun to go, the revived priest and his sister poured out nonstop thanks for saving them, yet he could barely take it in, because all he could think about was the brutal truth. After everything, his work had earned him nothing. They pulled him in with open arms and begged him to come back to the church again, promising help if he ever needed it, but he just mumbled something vague, still reeling from how wild everything had turned. As he stormed out of the church, disappointment still stung from the failed deal, but something stranger hit him instead. A sudden, eerie understanding of everyone inside, like a brand new bond had formed with the very place he once hated. The young woman told him she'd heard about his weird business from Sumir-chan, and she wanted answers fast, because she'd been told he was the go-to guy for those strange powers people call skills. Our protagonist straightened up and confirmed who he was, introducing himself as a collector who hunts down unwanted skills, ready to help however he could. She kicked off her tale by admitting she'd just inherited a piece of land from a relative, but the place felt wildly wrong, like it was hiding something unsettling and impossible. As she talked, the overhead shot caught the three of them huddled in that quiet cafe, and the air turned colder with every chilling rumor she spilled about the land. She said the moment anyone, yes, even her, came near the place, sickness hit them hard, and soon the neighbors were whispering the same rumor. A homeless guy with a freaky, unbelievable gift had moved in. As a simple merchant, she felt totally helpless, apologizing for dragging him into such a weird request, until Samir stepped in, pointed out just how shaken her friend was, and made it clear he was the only one she could truly count on. Seeing how badly both women begged him, he didn't even flinch. He took the job on the spot, promised to investigate the site, and told the first one to lead the way. They rode in a carriage for what felt like forever, farmland and peaceful hills sliding past outside, while the three of them sat close together, like the weight of their destination was pressing on their chests. After what felt like forever, the young merchant finally blurted, "We're here," and jabbed a finger ahead at a tiny village tucked right into the hills. As they stepped off and closed the distance, a battered, broken tower appeared, teetering on the lip of a jagged cliff, completely cut off from the rest of town. Sumir instantly felt a suffocating, crushing pressure pouring out of the ruin, and the client wasted no time confirming that this terrifying vibe was the whole cause. She told us the tower was already standing the day she inherited the land, and people got hit with this awful sickness whenever they got near it, so bad she wished she could tear the whole thing down. And the scariest part, everyone was basically sure someone was living inside. He fired up his presence detection skill, and boom, his suspicions were right. One massive, unstoppable presence was lurking inside that crumbling wreck of a building. She kept talking, laying out every specific problem, how she and her neighbors would get hit with weird stuff the moment they got too close, like their eyes swore they saw something, even though it wasn't really there. They spotted soldiers from some forgotten age and birds that shouldn't even be alive, and it left Sumir wondering if a hallucination ability was messing with her eyes. He confirmed her theory, explaining that hallucination is a pretty common skill, and most of the time it only makes the user see illusions. And once his skill climbed even higher, it went from strong to terrifying. He could slap his conjured world onto other people, trapping them all inside one shared illusion. Two women stared on with tight, worried faces, realizing what it meant when someone this dangerous finally showed up. If those hallucinations really are the source, then someone's living in that abandoned place and actively feeding the power, so getting anywhere near it is brutally hard. The skill collector stayed ice calm and stepped in himself, betting that his one-of-a-kind skills could cut through the illusions, and maybe even buy that nasty ability from the person who was behind it. He whirled to the girls and ordered them to head back, telling them he'd handle it from here, only for Samir to snap with instant worry. She fought back tears, desperate to help, scared out of her mind that he might not be okay alone. He flashed her a calming smile and told her worries mattered, but he'd be just fine, his quiet kindness settling her nerves as she watched him gear up to go out alone. He tuned his mindset and moved in with surgical care, keeping his presence detection skill blazing so he'd spot every shift in the world before it caught him. He strode down the narrow path, staring at that strange tower looming in the distance, knowing he was stepping straight into danger with no idea what might happen next. The instant he crossed that invisible line, reality snapped and twisted. 1 second it was just a grassy path, and the next it erupted into a savage, overgrown forest packed with giant, otherworldly plants. That ruined tower vanished in the distance, and in its place rose a massive, jaw-dropping castle, its ramparts thrusting straight up toward the sky. He stood beneath the hulking fortress, staring at an illusion so perfect it felt breathing, like the skill user had bottled raw, unstoppable power right in front of him. He tried to piece it all together. This was meant to be the ruined tower's ground, but the castle in front of him looked way too familiar, like it had been ripped straight out of an old history book. He dug up an old map of the whole continent, back from the days before the great Kinukeshev nation, when the land was split into a bunch of smaller kingdoms. A jolt hit him when he realized this place used to be the Rappi kingdom, gone 500 years ago, and now he had to wonder, was he hallucinating, or did he somehow get thrown back in time? He instantly shut down the whole idea of time travel, because only one rare talent on Earth can rewind time, so the only answer was a terrifying hallucination, huge enough to make his stomach drop, and just as he stared, a sharp voice cut through the air, demanding to know what he thought he was doing here. He whipped around, and there it was, armored soldiers packed around him, spears and halberds aimed like they'd been waiting all along, their bodies so real it was chilling, even though they were just illusions. He tried to apologize and talk it out, but the soldiers just wouldn't react. Their programmed minds couldn't handle a real conversation. One of the guards clocked his modern clothes and snapped that he was a leftover from the Rappi kingdom, history laughing in the same sentence. He tried to fix the mess, insisting, "I'm not your enemy, I'm here on business in the castle," but his words bounced right off their deaf ears. The commander brushed off his plea like it was nothing, snapped that a commoner didn't belong anywhere near the castle, and then ordered his men to grab the suspicious intruder and haul him straight into the dungeon. A spark of realization flashed across the skill collector's face. Yeah, getting captured wasn't ideal, but it was the straight shot into the castle, so he let it happen. Soldiers surged in to grab him, moving like a well-oiled strike team as they obeyed every last order. A brutal hit from the butt of a poleaxe slammed into him from behind, and the shock felt way too real. His vision instantly went dark. He jolted awake in a cold, damp stone dungeon, and the dripping water kept slamming echoes off the walls. He jerked awake bound tight, then got tossed into a cell. Iron bars slammed shut behind him, and the guards just watched like predators waiting for the next move. The guard yanked his bindings loose and shoved him deeper into the cell, slammed the heavy door shut, and let the key grind into place with one final metallic clack. As he shot upright, the phantom sting from that hit and the rope burn on his skin felt brutally real proof that the illusion was deadly on point. Then a voice ripped through the air from the cell across the hall. He grumbled about his awful luck, saying this cell was meant for small-time offenders, yet he'd be free in 2 weeks, and that's when the skill collector realized the grand hallucination had the other prisoners trapped in it too. Across the way, the prisoners jeered and laid it bare. This was death row, and they said they were the leftover remnants of the Rappi kingdom. The name snapped into place, matching what those phantom soldiers swore would be true, and the man hit me with the rest. After the Rappi kingdom fell, the survivors were dragged into slavery. Even so, anyone judged too dangerous or too influential wasn't enslaved. He had them thrown into a cell to be executed, a brutal end waiting for the kingdom's loyalists. A clear leader in the neighboring cell clocked him instantly, and a sharp, cold glint flashed in his eyes. Bound in chains and still warned to stay quiet, this man refused to fold. He declared they weren't just going to the execution block. Then he rattled off his ruthless talents. Hallucinations to mess with their minds, elite sword skills, and enough brute strength to shrug off the impossible, proving they'd been biding their time for the perfect moment to break out. Even after they lost the war, he shouted that they'd never quit so long as they were still alive. And right then, watching that man's burning determination, the skill collector tracked him down. Man crammed behind iron bars in his cell was clearly the spark behind every last hallucination. He surged to his feet and strode to the bars, locking eyes with that powerful prisoner, who had no idea his 500-year agony was already blasting into the world. Once he locked onto his target, he started cooking up a plan, first win the man's trust, then try to bargain for his hallucination skill. He snapped a piercing look back at him and demanded, "Are you one of Rappi's last people too?" Then dropped the bomb that he was once a general of the kingdom. Flashback burst to life, and there he was, our general in his prime, blazing in shining armor with a regal cape billowing behind him, the country's living hero, the strongest warrior in the army, a legend who had slaughtered countless beasts and enemies to defend his home. The general's stare pinned him in place, reading that stubborn fighting spirit still burning in the young man's eyes, and when he demanded why, the general's own voice cracked with despair, admitting he'd been reduced to a death row prisoner, utterly lost and swallowed by the enemy. He swore his spirit wouldn't give up. There were too many unfinished dreams. Then his mind jolted back to the days when he ruled with respect, mapping brutal strategies with his loyal soldiers. He'd been hunched over maps for hours, plotting how to crush the dangerous high-level beasts that prowled near the kingdom's northern defenses, because that job wasn't optional, it was sacred. His mind drifted to brighter days, racing through the streets as cheering citizens showered him with gratitude, the hero who answered his people's hopes, until his thoughts snapped to one deadly day at a noble's estate, where he crossed paths with someone extremely particular. He remembered stopping on the grand veranda, and a faint sound snapped straight into his focus. Hiding behind a pillar, the little girl peeked out with bright curiosity. Then he smiled and asked, gently, if she was the daughter of the house. Right past her shyness, the little girl marched up to him, hooked her hand in his armored gauntlet, and blurted, way too boldly, whether he was strong. A panicked attendant lunged to grab the kid back, stammering apologies for her outrageous boldness, but the general only nodded and confirmed it, then launched into a braggy tale of his monster-slaying victories, even mentioning an enemy general. The girl stared at him with this unsettling seriousness, then she straight up asked him if he could kill her too. Shocked by how dark a kid's request could be, he dropped to his knees and told her to slow down, to live, and to see the world before thinking about death. Then when she asked if he'd kill her once she was grown, he couldn't even promise her that. But he still kept his word, one quick, spur-of-the-moment vow he made to that strange little girl, promising he'd come back and see her again someday. His memories slipped away, and the general was trapped again in the dead, cold darkness of his cell, his face twisted in raw agony as the flames of his vanished past curled around him, and he rasped that everything, every single thing, had been stolen from them. The skill collector hunched in his cell and listened in silence, his face heavy as the general's heartbreaking tale finally sank in. He knew the truth was way crueler than anyone could guess. This war didn't just happen yesterday. It shattered the world 5 whole centuries ago, yet that guy talked about it like it was happening right now. Even so, his spirit stayed defiant. His voice thundered as he swore he'd break free and bring the Rappy Kingdom roaring back to its old glory. Pity crashed over the skill collector, and he knew spilling the truth to this man would hurt like hell, but it was a truth he had to say anyway. With status resistance roaring in his core, the illusory rope unraveled into nothing, an asterisk click asterisk, the lock on his cell door snapped open, leaving the general frozen in stunned confusion. He stood in the open doorway, thrusting a hand out and telling the old warrior, "Time to go, this prison is done," because a whole world waited for him beyond those walls. The general gawked in pure disbelief, snapping, "What do you think you're doing?" as the illusion's fabric split, tore, and rippled around them. The stone walls of the dungeon melted into a blinding glow, and every one of those 500-year-old memories shattered like glass. They suddenly found themselves not inside a castle, but perched on the crumbling ruins of a stone tower, staring down at a calm modern village, so completely different it felt unreal. The old warrior shook with disbelief as the skill collector finally dropped the brutal truth. 500 years ago, the Rappy Kingdom crumpled, and the ground beneath them now belongs to the continent's biggest power, Kenakashiv. The general shouted that it couldn't be true, but the truth got exposed. This man had probably died ages ago, and his deep, crushing regrets trapped his soul here, fueled by his own hard-earned skill. 2 girls came back, and the client leaned in like it was a confession. She said the last landowner warned her that weird, impossible things would show up the moment anyone stepped onto that property, proving the whole thing wasn't a trick but something ghostly. As it finally clicked, the general felt the weight of 5 centuries slam onto his shoulders, because every soldier, every castle, every prison, it was all his doing, and not a single piece of his own era survived. His curse, his hallucination skill, hung in the air like a ghostly specter, and he crumpled to his knees, whispering, "All I ever wanted was to protect my people." The grief that had rotted inside him for half a millennium finally snapped. He crumpled to the ground, clutching his head, sobbing hard, and blaming the one skill that kept his memories alive for his endless suffering. As he watched the spirits tear at the man's agony, the skill collector snapped into action. He couldn't take away the pain, but he could break the curse that kept him trapped here and finally give him release. He strode up to the kneeling spirit and laid out a straightforward deal: let him buy the hallucination skill. The general snapped his head up, clearly baffled, so the young man leaned in and told him about his insane power. He can buy skills from anyone, even the cursed ones, and he swore that with the right use, that curse could turn into something powerful. He kept going, saying it was his job to hoard all these unwanted skills, and if this power only meant more suffering for everyone else in trouble on his doorstep, then he'd happily take it off their hands. A tiny spark of hope flickered in the old warrior's eyes as he demanded to know if the collector could really use that cursed skill for good, and the collector answered with a quiet, unwavering nod. The skill collector laid down the one rule: using his power would cost something. Since he couldn't pay a spirit with cash, he offered a request instead, and the general immediately got it, then nodded like it was the only deal that mattered. The old warrior, still ghost-like and deadly calm, sharpened his breath as he got ready to demand his one final wish. His mind snapped back to that odd little girl from years ago, and to the promise he swore he'd return, one he still hadn't managed to keep. He begged the skill collector to track down what happened to her, whether she truly lived with a smile, no regrets, and even if she had a grave, so he could apologize from the bottom of his heart, and the skill collector said yes, but only if he gave her name. The spirit finally spoke, Kuori, and claimed she was a noble's daughter from the Rappi kingdom. The collector heard that name and his eyes snapped wide with instant, crushing shock. His thoughts snapped straight to that huge gated mansion he knew like the back of his hand, and he muttered Kuori under his breath. On the manor's balcony, a young woman who looked exactly like the child from the general's memory got hit when a potted plant crashed off the roof above and shattered on her head. She hauled herself up out of the dirt and shattered ceramic, shocked she was totally unhurt, yet her face screamed exhaustion. Then she whispered that, for the first time, she'd died at dawn, and the skill collector was about to rip her apart again, because her identity and her cursed skill were finally out in the open. Kyrie Immortality Level 1.